And thank you for having us. And oh, do you need me on here? Did you say you're recording this? So do you want me here? Better? Is that better? Okay. Then I don't have to worry if you can't hear me over the mask. So, and thank you, Liz, for inviting us to come. I love being up here, so I'm glad we have a handful of things planned. We're going to hang out tonight and stay over. And so we're glad to be here to chat with you today. So just a little bit about me, since I'm going to ramble for 3 hours. But there's going to be a lot of discussion. Now, of course, it's not moving forward. Where do you think I click? Oh, it looks like I might be moving on that screen. I'm clicking something behind you. Let's see. Okay, now my clicker's working. Okay. Well, anyway, back there, you just was me. But so a little bit about me. As Liz said, I'm on the WIDA board. But I'd like for you to know a little bit about me, since I'm going to sit here and kind of chat at you. But I have worked in for the town. I've worked for a village, I've worked for a city, I've worked for the county, and I've worked for the state. I haven't made over to the federal dark side yet. And recently, the last 2.5 years, I've been in the private sector. And just continuing to do community economic development at Vierbecker. I'm the municipal services manager. Just a few other fun things about me. If you have a recommendation, I believe I'm a connoisseur for cheese curds. So I love cheese curds and good beer. So that's the plan as we hang out later tonight. I am a Wisconsinite. I grew up in Kenosha, went to school in Oshkosh, and now I currently live in Madison. And I have staff in Madison, Reedsburg, Milwaukee, and we have a very small office in Prairie du Chien, but I don't have any staff over there. And what we do is civil engineering. I'm on the WIDA board. I'm on a handful of other LGBTQ boards. I'm involved at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. I don't know, a million other activities. I'm the PTO president at my kid's school, and a lot of different other activities. Currently building a house. So on the other side, I'm going to be joining the Plan Commission when our house is done in one of the towns that I'll be living in. So kind of seen every side of it, and I'm excited to be here to just chat with you today about economic development. Clicker's not going again. I don't know what I did.
I got you when it doesn't work, though.
Perfect, thank you. So, I guess one of the things I'd like to talk to all of you about is thank you so much for your time. We're going to chat about a handful of things. We are certified through the International Economic Development Council, both Mary Perry and I, as certified economic developers. And so we work through a handful of goals, ideas, and activities in this program today that are specifically going to highlight kind of the theory and the teaching in strategic economic development that is supposed to be international. When they train us, they kind of teach us, if you're doing this in any community, this is valuable information. And so what we'd like to start with before we dive in really is, you know, why you're here. I know most of you are council in front of me, and staff and other friends hanging out behind me. But I'd love to just hear from you why you're here. And if it's because they made me, then I don't know, make something up because you didn't, it's too warm outside or something. But really just chat about why you're here. And then if you have one economic development goal, community development goal, and then if there's anything that you really want to leave with. So as we kind of go through details today, love to just hear. So I don't know if we want to start on this side and we'll work our way all the way around if that works.
So I'm Sarah Watson. I'm District 8 Alder. I'm also ED Committee Chair, so that's sort of why I'm here. I'm sort of interested to learn more about the process, and I have a degree in economics, so I really love economics, but one of the big goals, I think, for economic development is supporting. I think that's one thing that I'm interested in, promoting and supporting our small businesses, so yeah, I'm just hoping to learn a little more.
Chad Hinkey, alderperson for District 11, Vice Chair, ED. So I guess I'm here to, I'm new to this, all the politics side of it, and I just want to be able to help as much as I can and learn what needs to be learned.
Awesome. Thank you.
Did you want me to say anything?
Up to you, Liz.
You guys know me. And I really appreciate WIDA being here to talk through some of these basic concepts to help us all just understand, as we have a lot of big development projects on the horizon in our community. I think that this will be really helpful for everybody learning how to objectively evaluate those. And I'm excited to be able to nerd out for 3 hours, so thanks.
I'm Carol Lukens, Alder for District 1, and I would agree with what Chad said. I'm here to learn.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
And I'm Doug Denny, District 4. I ran specifically because of economic development issues in the past,
Cool.
and quite honestly want to make sure we're doing everything correctly. Hopefully this points us in that direction. Thank you.
Awesome. Do you want to use mine, Randy?
Podium. Randy Pfeiffer, Economic Development Manager for the city. Excited to go through this. I think that there's so much potential in Wausau. There's so many great projects that we're talking about. Just finding ways that we can successfully bring some new and exciting development to our city.
Is all going to come up or just call in from the back?
Andrew Lynch, I'm an assistant city planner with the City of Wausau, and I don't think I've met you, so hi. I'm new. And again, I'm just here to learn. I've mostly had a transportation planning background, so yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
I'm not going to use the microphone.
Okay.
I'm loud enough.
Yeah.
I'm Shannon. I am Community Development Assistant. I work with, or Assistant Specialist, whatever. Work with Tammy. Mainly working with our Community Development Block Grant, sub-recipients, down payment assistance program. But I'd like to learn a lot more about economic development and help out anybody I can.
Cool.
Yeah, it's all community development staff back there. Like Shannon said, I'm Tammy Strotz, Community Development Manager. We do more of the block grant, the housing side of things. But our department also does planning and ED, so whenever I can learn more about what the other side is doing, knowing that I can hopefully help them, it's always a good thing.
Cool. Are you guys still doing Live It Up too?
We are.
Awesome, love that. That's an amazing program. It was one of our award nominees a couple years ago at CETA. So, yes, I wrote one of the nominations. So I think it's an awesome program.
Great to see you.
Well, thank you all. Mary, and do you want to just go later when I got you in here? Or do you want to present now? All right. All right, Liz, I'm not clicking again. So, as I said, I'm on the WIDA board. What WIDA does, and I'm going to let Mary tell you more, but we are a membership organization on behalf of community and economic developers around the state, and our focus is really on carrying out the activities to serve our members. Mary Perry is our fearless leader and our executive director, and so she is here to kind of give you a little bit about the spiel of WIDA, what we do, how we serve. We're always grateful when Randy and Liz attend a lot of our activities, and we try to partner with multiple people around the state. AARP has been one of our partners, the downtown groups, the league. We try to continue to build those relationships and make sure that when we're out there speaking on behalf of our communities and our members, we're truly speaking for community and economic development and ensuring, even moreover on the legislative side, that we're advocating for good, positive growth and change in Wisconsin. So I will pass it off now quickly to Mary Perry to kind of give you the spiel on WIDA. Thank you, dear.
Okay, here's my spiel.
Oh, your bio.
I'll do my bio. So I'm Mary Perry, as was mentioned, and I've spent 20-some years in workforce and community and economic development. When back in the olden days, we were Department of Commerce. When I first got into the field, I didn't even know what economic development was. I was introduced to somebody on the floor in the economic development agency called Commerce, and they said, well, what will you be doing here? And I was like, economic development? So I had zero knowledge of what that was. I learned from so many wonderful people through the years, through peer learning, through my membership with WIDA. So I wanted to tell you about WIDA a little bit. Melissa started off by telling you kind of what we do. Our membership is made up mostly of people who work in community and economic development, but we have membership of levels that include elected officials as well. We have, if you think about any person or entity that would come into play as a stakeholder perhaps on an economic development project, you know, you're always going to have a law firm, you're always going to have a bank, you're always going to have a community or economic developer, you'll have a body, a governing body, you'll have engineering firms, construction firms, developers, all kinds of professionals that somehow or another intersect or touch with that. So our membership is made up of about 1/3 of our membership is community and economic development practitioners, and then the other 2/3, all kinds of other individuals. We offer professional development. Some of you may know of our basic economic development course, which is a 4-day course that goes through all the foundational elements. So we're touching on those foundational aspects of economic development today. But if you have a burning desire to know more, that's a really good course to sign up for. It takes place this year, September 12th through 16th or 15th, I think, in a community called Pewaukee, which is in southeastern Wisconsin, near Milwaukee. Aside from that, we offer.
The clicker works. I think I have all your slides on here. But...
Oh.
Oh wait, did I do that or did you?
You did it.
Oh, good, it's working.
Oh. All right, so we also have our academy, which these are examples of what we did last year. We didn't get the very last row down there says placemaking, and we didn't get that done last year. We had a lot of interruptions, as everybody did, with continuing COVID. It just kind of continued to mess up our year. So placemaking is actually something that's coming up as a webinar in August this year, and you're going to be able to find all of the current information on our website, weda.org. One of the things that I wanted to tell you about that's really, really key with an offering that we have is our advocacy. WEDA actually has 2 organizations. Our charitable organization, our C3, which is WEDI, the Institute, and that's involved in research and helping find information to support what we do at WEDA, our C6 organization. We actually have a paid lobbyist, full-time paid lobbyist on staff. And examples of what we put forward in the legislative process in this last session was, of course, broadband and things that have to do with talent attraction. One of the bills that we did get passed was the ERTID, which you guys will want to know about, and I welcome you to contact me offline if you want more on a specific aspect of this. ERTID is the Environmental Remediation Tax Incremental Financing District Bill. And it was in place in the past, but it has now been enhanced, giving communities more flexibility. What used to be considered a proper use of funds for a municipality's ERTID would be contamination of ground and water. And the new ERTID bill supports contamination within a structure. So costs to maybe raise school and church. I know in my neighborhood, we have a number of Catholic parishes who have consolidated with one another because there aren't that many kids and parishioners anymore. So the problem with attracting a developer to a project like that is that in the case that I'm citing, there's over $1 million in cost to remove that lead pipe, lead paint, and asbestos from that building, from some of the buildings that they're going to keep and build upon. And some of it needs to be raised, like it's an old I don't know what year it was, but there's nothing historically pretty about the actual elementary school. So they're going to raise that. And now with this ERTID flexibility, that community is going to be able to use that kind of financing to remove those things and get it ready for new use. It's going to be mixed use with housing on different levels, affordable housing plus also market rate housing. The other thing do we have another slide after advocacy? CRA credit. Okay, thank you. So the other thing that we have for our members is we are the connection between your community projects that may have difficulty in finding conventional financing and our entire statewide network of banks. We have a membership level called CRA network that banks typically who are looking for CRA service credit or CRA investment credit or CRA loan credits are interested in this membership level. And what we do is we hear from communities all across the state about a project that may be in maybe a project that needs, that would be called something like neighborhood revitalization, but it just doesn't check off all the boxes with, job creation or capital investment or credit being perfect or whatever. And so it needs somebody, it needs a financing arm that's going to look more broadly at what is good for the community. And it may or may not be CRA eligible, depending on the census tract, but we don't make a decision on whether or not that's important to let the bankers know. But the bankers take our calls when we get a project and they say, what do you got for me? So CRA Network is another really nice example of what we do. I'm giving it back to Melissa, but I want you to know that I brought you membership brochures, so if any of you are interested, the lawmakers membership category is really economical, $50 a year.
Awesome, thank you, Mary. And I think Liz, you and Randy are both members, aren't you? That's what I thought. We've spent some time together at conferences, so I'm pretty sure we've seen you around. So, as we kind of dive in here, so I want to kind of break down about how we all work together, sort of how we get to where we are, and really what the goal is to really talk more about you and the local level, but just kind of understanding how we put all the pieces together and what that means for us. So in our partnerships, I like to think of this even from the stuff that I do on a day-to-day basis. So I serve as a staff member in multiple communities on CDA, RDA, Plan Commission, Village Board, City Council, and reports all those things. But it's really important in the economic development side that we pull in our partners in education. We pull in our partners at the county level. We work at the state level. We think about what's going on in Department of Financial Institutions. As Mary mentioned, our bankers are very important to getting our deals done, our private sector developers, our chambers, the whole 9 yards. We know that every community is a little bit different. Downtowns are super important, as Mary mentioned, placemaking and making sure things are happening. You have a beautiful one here. Actually, I think Liz, we got to hang out for a while a few years back, and we wandered around downtown to see how things that were going on. And so all those pieces are crucial and critical to making the process go better, go well, and ideally you hopefully have stakeholders, partners, teammates, and friends in all those places that can help you out along the way. So we'd like to mention that because our lead agency from the state perspective is the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. Their focus is on making sure communities are served. Obviously things change. Mary Perry and I both worked there together for 8-9 years. Mary was there even longer than me. And recruited me over there, but our focus is on ensuring that communities are surviving, striving, thriving, and we're continuing to see investments made so the tax base grows in the state of Wisconsin. So that's kind of one step to the partnership. Then we go down, you have a regional economic development organization here. Being candid, it's right, it's had its ups and downs. There's a lot of things going on. I think Gordon's in the process of retiring. But they're a partner, they're a player, and they're someone that needs to be engaged. There are certain opportunities that do come down at the federal, state, and other levels where they need to be a player, and we'll continue to work through. I know the state continues to look at structure and organization and how that works, but I like to mention them because it is, again, as we kind of go through that process of who we are, how we get there, who our teammates and friends are, there's the Regional Economic Development Organization, I like to joke the redo, keep trying, and then we go down to the county level. The County Economic Development Corporation, the county as a whole, obviously plays an important part. Small things down to zoning in some of our smaller communities, how they partner with you at the city level, what activities they take on as a county, as you all know. And again, I don't need to kind of get hit through every piece, but it's really important as we go through this, we kind of think about what it all means. So next, what do we like to do when we start these is we just like to Google search a community and say, hey, if I was a new business owner, if I was a young professional, if I was someone just graduating high school, and, oh, this is the wrong, Mary, I forgot to change it, but this is all Wausau data, not Whitewater. Sorry, we reused some of our slides. But you can see population and all the information is right. But what does it tell me? And so the one thing I do want to say is there was no negative press. I mean, obviously some things that happened over Memorial Day, but there wasn't anything terrible about you out there. It was pretty basic. It was a lot of community information. Like the biggest things on Twitter were the weather. Kind of funny, right? But that's kind of a good thing. in a sense that there's no negative perceptions out there. If you're a developer and you're looking at the area, there isn't anything that says like council didn't vote for this project, or 6-hour meeting because council couldn't get along. Let me tell you how often that happens is a lot more than you think. Plan commission meetings, even in small towns, hit the local newspapers more often than you can imagine. So I will say pat on the back and high five to you all for that, because whether you do or don't get along, the perception isn't anything negative. Now, the fact that the biggest thing on Twitter was the weather is kind of funny, and I mean that in the most sincere way, because that's all I could find. And you can see on there, there's even one of the weather maps. That was your top tweet over the last week on Twitter, was the weather. And then when we just dive into some of the basic information, like I said, it was really standard. Here's your metro, here's your population, mayor, and then the top things that came up in the second Google search was the top places to visit. So all in all, fun things to do. State Park, Art Museum, it makes it look like you have a fun, artistic-esque, like I said, nothing negative. You'd be surprised at how many communities don't have that. We were in one of the last ones where there were employees, another one we did where employees were picketing at one of the companies. Super negative perception that gets out there. And if this is the worst thing you see or the best thing that you see when you Google, that's a pretty darn good thing. So those are kind of our thoughts to kind of kick it off and get started. Now we're really going to dive into kind of warming up, talking about the environment. We'll take a little break. Before then, we dive into kind of tools, funding, and then really hit some lower or deeper TIF kind of theory thoughts, kind of how it all pieces together. Sort of high level, but really diving in a little bit so you get a better handle on that. Talking about the deal, we're going to have some real conversations. I want you to be honest. We're going to, I can weigh in on a lot of my experiences, kind of what we see at the state level. And then really the goal is so that you leave here with some thoughts, ideas, being empowered. We have some other tips that we'd like to take away with, and hopefully you're excited about today, or as excited as we are to be here. So we like to do what we call kind of a warm-up. And what we want you to do is either get together in groups of, usually it's easier in 4, and maybe you guys just go half the room, 4 and 5. Oh my gosh, Mary, I really failed. I did a control find, and it should say Wausau, not Whitewater. So I am so sorry, you all. Epic fail today. I'm having a Monday. But the intent here is really to talk about, maybe like 5 to 6 minutes, maybe even less. But the whole theory is, see, I have Wausau right here. But sell me, what does it mean? If you had to give, let's say you ran into a developer on the street, you ran into someone who's graduating and maybe they have a job opportunity here, what would you say about your community? And the idea is we like to kind of put you in 2 separate groups to see what you come up with if it's the same thing. And then after we chat today, we do this again to kind of end and see if there's anything different that you'd say about your community after we kind of give you some of the tips in economic development. I will tell you, a lot of times we hear about the bike paths and the roads and where you can hike and bike and swim and all those kinds of things. I don't want you to have a perception that you have to tell me anything. I want you to tell me why you're here, what your spiel is. If you ran into someone to convince them to live here, to move their kids here and go to school here, whatever it is, I'd like you to do that. So if you guys want to do it in groups 3, 4, 2, and maybe since it's a small group, usually we do this over 10 minutes and kind of report out, but maybe in 5 minutes you could group together and chit chat. So I'm going to say, yeah, why don't you this side of the room and this side of the room, and kind of quick conversation will give you 5 minutes to chat. All right, so what's the spiel? Who's first? Carol, do you want me to kick it to the other side, or you want to spiel first?
I can go.
All right.
Sure. So we talked about how Wausau is centrally located, so it's a smaller community, smaller city, but with some of the bigger city amenities. So you can really go a couple of hours in any direction. And, going north, there's some nice access to outdoor parks. And even here, it's quick access to outdoor activities here. And if you go, east, west, south, there are bigger cities. Wausau's a very family-friendly community, so there's lots for families to do. outdoors, the arts, we've got a pretty nice arts program community here. And, you know, the farmers market, they've been adding more and more over the years. And then the schools too are great. Anything you would add? I don't know if I'm forgetting anything. Okay. And then also, being on the highways with 29, you know, east and west, and then north and south. So we're kind of at, you know, in the crossroads. So that's good too. And people come from some distance to work here as well and to shop here. Traditionally they have. So I'm probably forgetting some, but that's a pretty good start.
That was great. Thank you. Nice job this side of the room. Team left side. All right, team right. What do you?
So in industry, we call these elevator speeches, so mine's probably not gonna be a minute, mine's gonna be
Yes.
really short.
Nice, Chad.
So, do you like the outdoors? Do you like big city feel events without the big city headaches? Do you like opportunities to come together as a community and spend time together? Come to Wausau.
Nice. Right. So, I mean, you'll have a turn at the end to, you know, compete with that, but great job. That was wonderful. You should get a recording of that, and you should, like, Twitter it or compete with the weather today on the Twitter. Yeah, you should TikTok that. I'm not there yet, but it's a coming thing. So why did we do that? I mean, the intent was really to, one, get you feeling, chit-chatting, talking about Wausau, getting us kind of for a feel and flavor and little mojo going into this. Because our intent today is really to talk about, you know, making good decisions, thinking about community and economic development. You have awesome staff who are all here, which is really impressive. But to make sure that you're on the same page as some of them when you're trying to explain things, maybe this helps a little bit. Empowering them, and we're going to dive into that because I can tell you I've been on both sides, and there's some good ways to really make sure your staff feel empowered and can move forward, so we'll chat about that a little bit today. You don't know what you don't know, so hopefully there's some things that you actually learned and you leave with a little bit. And then really, again, we want to empower you so when you leave today, you can make some good things happen. Maybe you're reaching out to some of your legislators, talking about what's important on the economic development side within your city, but also at the state level. We're going into an election year. There, we talked a little bit about how important TIF and some of the other stuff we talked about, broadband. You guys have a lot of great things going on here, and we want to make sure whatever we're doing also at the state and other levels continues to move forward. So the intent, kind of, as I said, well, we hope you leave with some knowledge. We'd love to have a little deeper dive into conversation on one of our slides about roles, what your role is. We'll talk a little bit about consensus and agreement, and sometimes just sucking it up when you don't agree. We'll talk about tools that you have. Wisconsin, we'll be honest, doesn't have as many as some of our other states, so when we compete on a national level, we really have to up our game. And it's not just our cool, humble, fun personalities. We do have a few things that we can toss out there as we're talking about it. And then hopefully we'll be able to just tie into some of the things you're working on now. So the one thing I will also add is if there's anything at any point, just yell, turn your mic on according to Randy so everyone hears you, but kind of jump in here and don't be afraid to ask questions, to talk about what we got going on. This is really meant to be more of a conversation. You all don't know me that well, but you give me a mic, I can definitely go for 3 hours. So feel free to shut me up at any point as well as we're kind of talking. So we're going to dive into economic development, and again, I think Liz is excited to nerd out, but Mary and I like to geek out too. So we're going to talk a little bit about the definition. What does it mean? Dive into a little bit of some of the stuff that they teach us at the national level to make sure we're literally saying the same thing everywhere in the world. We have partners that we do actually work with around the world that do this. And the intent, right, if we're kind of working backwards, is for a stable tax base, right? It's a heck of a lot easier when you're sitting up there making budget decisions, when you're talking about capital improvement planning. When you dive into every other piece and what road needs to be done and where you're making cuts and not making cuts, man, if we can continue to grow that tax base or it's stable, it sure does make budget time and other decisions that you make a little bit easier. Obviously, we all remember live, work, play, and I think we still use that in a lot of communities and cities, especially here in the Midwest. But the intent really is, as we're putting projects together, programs, as you're thinking about how you're developing the riverfront, is there a river walk Should you have an office building, or should you have multifamily? Should it be affordable housing, or should it be market rate? You know, our intent is really focused on economic well-being, quality of life, people having jobs, and then growing the tax base. You know, there's one other piece in here that at the international level they talk about often as we continue to think about our world as we evolve, that we've had a lot of debate internationally on that it's, you know, developing wealth. You have a lot of that in this community. But one of the other focuses is that we're not just improving the economic well-being and the quality of life and creating jobs and developing our tax base, but ensuring that people continue to grow and develop from that economic well-being standpoint to have some wealth to invest in the community. That helps as well. And so as we talk about that again, this is kind of our framework going into today, is thinking about that improving economic well-being, the quality of life. It's that live, work, play. Do people have jobs? Do they have good employers? What are the neat things that are happening? And then effectively, for you all, as you're making decisions, is there a stable tax base which makes a lot of your decisions easier? So in community and economic development, we used to kind of have this dichotomy of there was the community feel-good people, and there was the economic development, and I'm going to be honest with you, good old boys, straight white guys who always focused on the industrial parks and building businesses, and we never put all of our pieces together. And there was so much that we did that was kind of in the middle. There was tourism, there were downtowns, there was our lobbying folks, and heaven forbid we kind of mixed in finance and bankers, and everyone kind of had their pieces. And we had sort of what was on that community development side was more institutional, social. It was your, we talked about workforce, we talked about education and healthcare, and it's really one big picture now. And so what we've done, and I can tell you this, when I started, I know I started when I was really young based on how I look, but about 20 years ago, these were different things. You had your community development folks, and you still see it in your departments, right? Like, we're not saying every community has to change what they're named, but you have these pieces, and we don't all focus together. And what we're really saying now is this new economic development. It's taking all those social pieces, all the institutional side, taking workforce and housing and downtowns and our bankers and all these other people who, environmentalists who kind of did separate things that didn't fit into another bunch. We threw them in the middle, the marketing and tourism. And we said, hey, let's take everything that we're doing on the business side. Let's think about even our zoning and approvals that we do in a community and plan commission. That all needs to be scrunched and crammed together into one big thing, because if one piece of the puzzle is out of line or we're not all working together, it just doesn't make sense. And so this is kind of in Wisconsin, one of the things that I think we've felt a lot of over the last 20 years is we've made modifications, and some communities are faster than others. You'll still see it in some of our big cities. I like to joke in Madison that like the real estate team still doesn't think they're part of economic development sometimes, and that's just not the case. And we've gone a long way, even like in Madison, for example, in the last 5 years to put those pieces together. The intent is really that we're all focusing and kind of, you know, I hate to use a stupid saying, but singing out of the same hymnal, making sure we're kind of on the same page in putting all the pieces together. So, because when you make one decision, it impacts so many other things. And if we can make sure everything's aligned, it makes things flow a lot better. So, diving into that public policy, and you are policymakers. Obviously, there's a lot of decisions that you make at monthly meetings, outside of monthly meetings. You're taking direction from staff. Sometimes you're not taking direction from staff, and that's a problem. But we're putting all the pieces together to say, do you understand how it works? And one of the biggest things that we see in communities is money, right? Everyone, we don't have money. Well, if we don't have any money, how do we make things happen? Well, do we even want to change? Maybe we don't want to change. And then we get into this piece of, well, now something came forward, and I don't know if we should do it. And so we have this weird circle of cash flow, can't afford change, if you see my picture up there. And so our intent as we talk about this today is say, do you know what your assets are? Sometimes they're not tangible things. Do you understand the value that you bring to the table? Do you understand the value that others bring to the table? Do we kind of see both sides of every picture? Can we start to plan as a community? And I'm a nerd, I'm a planner at heart, so I can tell you, like, your comprehensive plan can be useful if you use it. Your economic development strategies that you put together, your community development strategies, housing, transportation, all those things can be useful if you use them, right? That's like the key to something being useful is you have to use it, and I think very often we don't always see that. And so when we talk about that, there's only finite resources in anything that you do. So if you're putting all those pieces together to say, well, on those finite resources, what do we use? How do we do it? Are we being strategic? There's things we're going to have to say no to. There's things we have to do. You obviously can't have a big business driving down a road where there's potholes or you're going to get that call every day, right? You also have to have bus stops and a million other things that people need. And so it's really interesting to figure out, like from a taxpayer standpoint, how do you serve your constituents to have a return on your investment, right? My investment's in my community. And it's to me, it was an interesting point in my career and thought when I was on, now I've been on both sides. I've been sitting in your seat, I've been the staff person standing here, I've been in Liz's seat, Randy's, I've kind of been on all your guys' sides to say, man, what does it mean for me? And in the end, we all probably agree a lot more than we think. And so it's how do we get to a place where we're sort of telling that whole story, we're taking advantage of what's in front of us, we're making sure we weigh different things out, and we're creating a good, healthy place to be. And so I think public policy weighs so much on, and it's one of those things that people either don't dive into, don't think about, or don't realize how important it is. And you sometimes probably don't even realize that it's what you do at your monthly meetings or your committee meetings or actively. And so I think we just want to say thank you. We recognize how important it is, and here's some of the things that we talk about as we kind of put those pieces together. So I love using a silly puzzle analogy, and my daughter was just doing a puzzle last week, and I was like, dang it, I meant to take a picture. She was like missing pieces because it was Harry Potter, but if you didn't see all the pieces, you could not understand what the map was a picture of. And this is kind of, you know, in that I'm telling you my story, but if you don't have a complete puzzle, one piece is missing, it is so hard to make everything fit together or to see the big picture. And so when we talk about community and economic development, when we talk about the activities that you do at the city level, we really put all those pieces together to say, in the end, our goal is to be a great place, right? I mean, I can't imagine any of you are up here because you don't want it to be a good place. And so there's businesses, there's education, there's entrepreneurs, there's so many different things. There's the new buzzword of the week. There's TikTok now. There's a million things that we need to think about that impact what we do. And it really falls into your leadership as a community to step up. And so that's why we talk about all this. This is, I keep kind of repeating myself, but really, I want you to kind of get a feeling for how everything overlaps what we talk about. We stole this from some folks down in, or over in Ohio who talk about this a lot. And then there's some folks down in Florida who've done it kind of cool. Then they really use the puzzle as their pieces because to me it makes sense, right? If you were all looking for the same thing, you see the whole picture in the end. But if you're missing one or two pieces of those puzzles, it's just not as pretty of a picture. And our goal is to paint a pretty good picture. Am I frozen?
Everything clicked.
So it moved on that screen. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Yeah. So another interactive moment for you all to raise your hands, but this is one of our favorite questions we like to ask. When you think about your community, and usually most people, we're Midwesterners, so maybe we're a little humble and we score ourselves low. But when you think about your community, there's kind of 4 different categories on how you function, how you work well together, where you're currently characterized in the process of community development, economic development. So my big question to you is you check out the screen above, and this is actually an international stat, but it aligns very well in the United States if you kind of look at, on average, how communities fall in the triangle. 10% of communities are super active. They're advanced, they get what's going on, they're dynamic, they make policy decisions, they'd be considered a great place to live, work, and play. 40% are disengaged. They probably put their comp plan on the shelf. They don't really care. They don't make a ton of decisions. A lot of our towns are like this, right? Like we want to just stay ag. It's okay that some of our streets are still gravel. This is how we want to be, and we don't want change or growth. And then there's the in-betweeners, the struggling and progressive. And so my one big question for you as you take a moment and think about it, where do you think you all fall? So everyone has to raise their hand, and it's a small group, so I can tell if you don't. But I'm going to start, oh man, down. No wonder the clicker doesn't work, huh? Thanks, Randy. Did I break it?
Oh, well, it's gonna, yeah, we'll charge it back.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to start at the bottom, but do any of you think you're a disengaged community? No show of hands. That's good, because I don't think you are either. The fact that you're here says a lot about you. All right, struggling. Anyone? Progressive. Advanced. Overachiever over here.
I can support that.
You can? Yeah, please.
So, like, you may not see it, but I've worked in other communities. I've looked at a lot of other communities for policies and different things. Wausau, when you look at the bigger picture and look at all communities, Wausau is definitely on that higher end of being more dynamic, proactive, so absolutely.
Nice job, Randy. And I would agree that you're pretty darn close to that progressive advanced line. Where I think I would say that you maybe miss out a little bit is that I know the area because I've hung out here. I like hanging out here. I don't know if you tell the story as well as you could. The fact that when I Google, you didn't say anything bad, but didn't say anything that kind of stands out. And we'll dive into that in a little bit too, talking about your point of differentiation. I would say to me, that's kind of where you fall in between that progressive to advanced. You're pretty darn close. You probably just have a few ways to get there. So kudos to you. I'll be honest, most of the communities we're in are either struggling or progressive because they invite us to come in and we have this conversation. But there's, always room for improvement. I think you're pretty darn close, and hopefully you leave with some things today that kind of help you get over that hump. Oh, I'm stuck again. It probably didn't help that I dropped it. Oh, now it's working because all right, I'll stop. But economic development versus economic growth. I want to quickly just hit on this because we hear this conversation a lot. People don't necessarily understand. So economic growth, right, if you're at the national level, it's GDP. We think about what that means. And I like to differentiate the two. Yes, economic development can impact economic growth. Economic growth doesn't necessarily impact economic development. It helps, but economic development is that policy, it's that action, it's the thing that you're doing locally that makes an impact. And you can do a lot of things in economic development. We like to joke that it's the journey, not the destination. You can do a lot of things in economic development that'll never impact economic growth. You can do a lot of things in economic development that will impact economic growth. But economic growth in general is a number of factors. Yes, it's valuable and we use it. But economic development is that important piece that covers so many different things. And when you're working on policy, or you're thinking about your downtown, or you're thinking about a bike path or a road, everything is a small part of that. And so we really want to talk about, yes, it's great if your tax base is growing. That's our goal. Yes, it's great if your businesses are making more money and you're selling product that's being sold outside of the region or the area or the state or the United States. But our focus today is really just to talk economic growth, economic development, and focus on economic and community development. And so I'd like to just tell the little bit of point of differentiation there, because you can make big strides. Economic growth can have both negative and positive impacts, and when we look at negative economic growth, we say it's a bad thing. Economic development and the focuses and things that you're doing are always positive, and that's how I like to kind of compare the two. And you can have good policy, you can make changes, you can have great economic development, and sometimes it may or may not impact economic growth. Obviously, in that perfect win-win situation, you have great economic development and you see economic growth. Oh, man.
I mean, just,
I wonder what do you think I have to point it at?
I don't know.
Did I do that or did you?
You did it.
Oh, all right. This is the fun clicker adventure today that we go on. So when we talk about development, we kind of have these sort of going through a handful of things we talk about kind of flows into our conversation. We're still in this warming up, talking a little bit about the basics and going into our flow. But one of the things we like to talk about are just strategies for economic and community development. And there's so many different things we can talk about. There's business retention expansion. That's serving your businesses that are already here. One of the stats is 80% of new businesses are actually formed from existing business that's in existence, right? So someone started something, they had an idea, it came out of something they did somewhere else, it spins off and grows. Our existing businesses are really important. Then there's new business attraction. It's saying, hey, I mean, we all remember the story on getting a Saturn plant. I think it even made like a Seinfeld episode. But Saturn isn't in existence anymore, right? So there's some interesting risks and things tied to business attraction, but it's also important because you do want big business in your community and you want people to look at your community to potentially locate. I mean, no one was complaining when Amazon HQ2 was looking around. Everyone was trying to promote their community. We're not saying that you should or shouldn't do that. We kind of have a little bit about tactics and tools, but we want to talk through all the things that are important. As Mary covered, we actually have a session on each of these. We have a national class we all take on all these things. But I wanted to hit on each of them so you kind of understand what some of the things that are thought about. Entrepreneurship and startups. More than anything, these days we need to be investing in that, gal sitting in their mom's basement or guy in the garage or a person that's, doing one thing at Culver's during the day and trying to build their app at night. I mean, there's a million different things that are coming up. Technology is changing. We hear all the time that some of the jobs that our kids are going to have are jobs that don't even exist. So as we think about that, we need to make sure we're helping startups, we're investing in entrepreneurs, and sometimes it's people of color opening a barber shop, and it's coffee shops, and it's all the different things, and the flower, shops. It's from big business to small downtown shops to, again, that person in their garage who's starting a new app for car dealers. I mean, it's crazy and interesting when I think of all the stuff that I've seen over the last 20 years or businesses that I've worked with, and we need to continue to grow that. Then we talk about workforce, talent attraction. Obviously, that's, no one can get employees these days from Culver's and McDonald's paying $15 to $20 an hour to, our shop floor people are still making $12 to $20 an hour. And so we continue to see that workforce is an issue, talent attraction is an issue. Everybody's stealing from everybody else, and we need to make sure we're supporting our businesses to continue to grow. And our schools are doing the right things. Our tech colleges are doing good trainings. We're one of the top tech colleges in the nation. We don't remember to tell ourselves that often, but we have some amazing skills and partners that really are developing those next level opportunities for our next employees coming down the line. Then we dive in, obviously, our favorites, the real estate, redevelopment, community and economic development, the fun, tactical opportunities. And the one thing we circle, if you see there on tools, that we like to point out to you, and this leans a little bit more to your plan commissions, but you make decisions in the end, are you helping your approval process? If a developer comes to the table, I don't care if it's someone who wants to build a 2-unit duplex with single-family zoning and 0 lot lines, or someone who's filling in an old site in your downtown area along the riverfront, or it's a new industrial developer. Are your approval processes easy? Can it be fast-tracked? If Liz gets a call, can she answer the questions she needs to answer to get a developer to come to the table? Is she empowered by you to make decisions to get you to the right place? Those are big things that need to happen, and if you want to be really good at this, if you want to be the winner of some of these deals and projects, if you want your community to develop, build faster, be done well, I will tell you that's one of the biggest things that we see, and that's why you see we have kind of the red box and the yellow circle there. There's a million other things you can do. But man, in that word of mouth, and if we're telling the story and a developer leaves here and says they were easy to work with, or hell, the wrong developer leaves here and says they were hard to work with, that's also a good thing sometimes. But you want to be able to say, we serve our citizens, we serve our people who are coming to town, we serve the businesses, and one of the really easy ways to do that is make sure you have a decent process in place. And we're going to dive even deeper into that as we go here. Again, thinking about comprehensive plans, I'm a planner by heart, so I'm a nerd, and I love diving into that. I don't care what kind of plan it is. It doesn't have to be an economic development plan. It doesn't have to be your comprehensive plan. It should be something that you all kind of agree on. There's going to be times you don't, but the one thing to remember is it's your plan, right? It's each one of your plan. It's not just Randy's plan, or if it's transportation, it's not Andrew's plan. If it's CDBG and housing, it doesn't fall back to just Shannon and Tammy. It all has to fit together, and as you're putting the pieces together as an individual council member, it hits District 4, it hits District 8, right? And maybe Liz is in charge of implementing certain pieces of it. If you don't all kind of click together through the pieces, as you're putting that puzzle together and all those pieces, if you're not all feeling the love, it's going to be a lot harder for it to be successful in the end. So, one of the things when we talk about plans is making sure you have goals. And yes, we all have different goals. Hopefully they align sometimes. It's even better if they align more often than they don't. But it should be goals that are achievable. But some of them should also be the BHAGs, the big, hairy ass goals, big, hairy, audacious goals, however you say it. There should be things that you can accomplish. There should be things that are hard. There should be things that are short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And then we should be really clear. Goals are kind of broad. Your objectives and your activities, those are the steps below that. But really the intent of putting a plan together is have some goals that give you a roadmap so you kind of understand where you're going. We highly recommend work plans. Do you have pieces that actually have those activities, right? So if your goal is we want to have good housing in the community, that's great. And then one of your objectives is affordable housing. One of your other objectives is different kinds of housing. Do we have multifamily? Do we have single family? Do we have 0 lot line in our single family? Maybe that's an activity as we're going to look at our policy and say, hey, do we allow duplexes? Do we allow 0 lot lines? Do we have small setbacks? Are we allowing tiny homes? Do we let people build a mother-in-law suite? Do we let people work out of their garages? I can tell you I've staffed enough plan commissions that I can't tell you how many times we've had arguments in small towns and in big cities about should a person be able to put a shower in their garage because they don't want to, they do a lot of work in their garage and they don't want to bring it back into the house. But then there's that fine line, right? If someone puts in a shower and now they have a little bathroom and now they're putting in a countertop and then they threw a microwave out there and now I got the building inspector saying to me, I think they put in an oven. Now we have a whole nother living unit. And so I think there's really interesting things that we can dive into, and I don't mean to go there, but I want to kind of tell you how I understand how some of this stuff spirals. That's where your goals and objectives are really important. So if your goal is to have more housing, and all of a sudden we hear someone's doing this, there is nothing wrong with having a mother-in-law suite, as we're seeing the changes. The last 2 years have obviously brought us a whole nother world of things we weren't aware of. Maybe that's something you want in your community, but then have the conversation, realize why you're doing it, figure out what goal it meets, figure out if it hits an objective, and then figure out what the activity is. And if it is, let's change our policy, let's allow people to build onto their houses. No, they can't have 2 ovens in separate units without firewalls or whatever the rules are. Follow those and go through that, but make sure you understand what your goal is then you go through your objectives, your tasks, your activities, that they all kind of align, and it's not just like, yes, the building inspector said this isn't a good thing and we're not going to do it. Because our building inspectors are super important, and sometimes they make really amazing suggestions, and sometimes they can be pains in the butt. And I mean that in the most sincere way. So it's like, how do we find a good balance? But their job is to follow the policy, and that is their job. And that's why they're a pain in the butt, because they're saying, no, we're not allowed to do this. So then it's your job to make a change to say, well, what policy doesn't align here? What do we want to do? Is it meeting a different goal or objective, and how do we make that happen? Again, diving into then those goals and activities, setting action, and then actually prioritizing them and actually understanding what they are. Many communities take big steps and say, hey, we've got all these goals, we've got 20, 30 things. And I can tell you, I'm staffing a community right now, and we're doing this. We just had too many things and too many people. We wanted to focus on the downtown and the industrial park, and we wanted to apply for a state grant, and we wanted to maybe close down a city street because we had to make some changes come COVID so people could eat outside, and we didn't want to piss off McDonald's, and we wanted to make sure downtown businesses were still successful. And we had like 90 priorities. And yes, we got a couple small things done, and they were big wins. But we probably could have a lot better and a lot focused and had a lot more big wins if we would have taken them 1 or 2 at a time and said, here's what our focus is, here's what our priority is. Not everyone's going to agree. And we'll dive into that a little bit more about talking about kind of consensus and what you do. But as you're going through that, you really need to have a tactical plan. You really need to make sure you're implementing at a point that you can be successful. You're kind of monitoring and measuring what you want, and we like to joke, rinse, and repeat. Like, right, if you can get something down, you have a goal, you have an objective, you work through the process, and you do it right, you're successful, and you move on and do it again. And again, not to beat a dead horse, but when we come in and we talk about community and economic development is one way for all of you to be on board. The fact that we're missing people here today, right, is, well, hey, they weren't here, but at some point we all need to get together and say we agree, we don't agree, a majority of us agree, and then that's what we're all going to go with. And so I think it's really important to make sure from a priority standpoint, moreover, you have, 5 staff sitting in here? I can tell you it's a hell of a time as a staff person if I don't know what the direction my council or the people I'm supposed to report to are going, what I'm supposed to do. And they probably also have really great ideas, and they might have a few bad ideas. It happens. I even have those sometimes. And, you know, we have to make sure we're all working together to say, well, where does this fit into our goal? Where does this fit into our plan? What are our activities or objectives? What's our priority? And how do we all get there together? So I think there's just a couple other things. And again, I'm not needing to beat a dead horse, but we do some of this because the international group tells us, hey, here's how you should walk through things as you talk to community leaders, as you talk about success and how you measure that. How do you know if your goals are right? Have you been successful? So when you think about the last 10 years, what your challenges are those things that you've actually focused on fixing? New goals that you've made for yourself, does it align with what those challenges were? If you have something that comes up again moving forward, are you able to solve it easier, better? Did you create a policy that fixes it? Have you reached out and hit on some of those community partners, different assets that you have? I will say again, is there group consensus? There is a difference, and we'll, again, I've mentioned this a couple times, but we'll dive into it later. Consensus and a majority are different things. In a perfect world, we want consensus. In a realistic world, 51-49 wins, right? So a majority is going to get us to a better place. And then the consensus is, hey, everyone's head nodding whether they want to or not because the majority voted. And sometimes that sucks, especially when you're not in the majority. But that's one of the things we also need to get to as we think about making changes, driving policy, making decisions, is that everyone's sort of on board whether they want to be or not. It's kind of like with kids, and I have a lot of my mom examples, but there's easier ways to get where we need to be. You may not agree with me until you start paying the bills. I say that at home a lot, right? Or until you decide to get up at 5 a.m. and shovel the snow or cut the grass or whatever it is. You don't get to weigh in. And sometimes there's that minority of people who are against something or don't think a policy decision is the right way to go. Sometimes you just lose and you're wrong because I'm the mom, right? Or because I'm the majority, or because we all agreed something's different or better. Not everybody loves, biking on the streets or biking on paths. There's a million things we can all debate or argue about that most people or some people or no people think are great. And so it's trying to get to consensus. And then the last thing is just understanding as we do that rinse and repeat, how do you measure your results? So success is, here, right? Your riverfront, that's a success. Your downtown, that's a success. But are there key businesses there? How many empty storefronts do you have? If you think about your industrial park, or you think about areas that you're growing, are your commercial corridors pretty to drive through? There's lots of different things that can be considered success and how you measure those results.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Good catch. Thank you. Yes. And then implementation. Like I said, again, we're beating a dead horse here, but we like to kind of go through the whole process. Just do it. So once you actually can align and have some majority agreement, maybe some consensus, then the worst part and the most fun part, in my opinion, is the implementation. So making it happen. Make sure you're following along. Make sure you have small wins, big wins. Make sure you have an early win. And then also make sure someone's accountable. So sometimes that's a staff person. Sometimes it's not fun. Sometimes it's a mayor, an administrator. It's someone at a different level. But really make sure you kind of agree on how you're measuring success so then you can talk about those wins. And the last thing, and I know some of this is obvious, but we all have good and bad days, be a good partner and focus on teamwork. So again, we hit consensus hard here. But the intent really is to have consensus. You don't have to agree. We're going to dive in, again, more on this. You have your agenda. We all do, right? There's lots of things I believe in and I want to happen in life. Find a way to make sure that in the end, when you're making decisions or you're looking at what it is, it's not necessarily your agenda that's overtaking the greater good or the decision, and you're hearing out everybody else. Again, some of the common things that I think are basic, but we like to repeat. So kind of as you think, a little bit, another just moment of conversations and discussions, but what is your council-staff relationships? Do you have a process? Is it a good process? Do you empower your staff? Obviously, we call me, I got excited when I was typing there, going through my list, but in order to be successful, we want to all succeed together. And so when everyone's kind of at the table, and I don't even know what Speller did on my last sentence there, but I guess that's my question for you. So I like to pause and take another moment here to just ask, do all of you feel like you know the process? Heck, staff, do you understand the process? Is it a good process? Do you empower your staff as council? And maybe the fact that the four of you are sitting here, you all do, because most people who show up are the ones who really care, and I mean that in the most sincere way, and not to bash people that are not here, because that's not the intent. We also have other things that come up in life, but maybe you're all head nodding and you guys all agree because you're here. But I think those things are important, so I'd love to just quickly take a moment. It's nice to either group hug and hang out for a moment, or just hear some other thoughts on things maybe you could do better. So, anyone have anything? We'll save staff complaints for the middle. So we'll do a hug, soft, hard, soft on the end.
Well, I would say, you mentioned metrics on there. That seems to be the buzzword that's been used in the past. I don't know in the past, that's probably our biggest failure is to communicate our metrics and what does it look like to be successful. Because when people see a development failing, for example, down on the river 8 years ago or so, 6, 7, 8 years ago, and we're being told that everything's still meeting the metrics, it makes it very difficult to really keep that moving successfully. So I guess that's a comment in general. Obviously, we have metrics that have been referenced in the past that maybe were a little more vague. Maybe they were meeting metrics to one person's point of view, but not to ours. And that, I'm going back a few years, well before Liz, so don't take any of that personal. Thank you.
Well, and that's a good point. I mean, I will say metrics are lots of different things to lots of people, and some metrics are good, and some are bad, and some are useless, and some aren't. So you can have a developer agreement, and you can have a TIF, and you can have things going really well on paper or in numbers. Perception is also reality, so there's a fine balance, and sometimes perception is not even close to reality, right? But it's what's out there. So I'll say you hit it on the head. I think tied to that implementation piece, understanding what the metrics mean and how they impact decisions you're making and how they impact overall long-term. Is it, in this case, right? Getting affordable housing in town doesn't necessarily always mean a major increase like you'd see in market rate housing when you're talking about stabilizing a tax base. But there's a hell of a lot of people that still need affordable housing. So there's a weird balance. So I'm with you there. I think one of the keys then is, as you're going through your plan and your process and putting your metrics together, making sure a majority of the people understand the value of the metric. Is it a metric that's useful to you or makes sense or valuable, tied back to your goal or objective? I mean, I was a downtown manager back in the day, so all of our downtown managers would hang out, and we'd be like, if you're not successful, if you don't have like 95% occupancy, so you want like minimal vacancies, right? Well, we built a brand new building. I was in Oshkosh, and it was like that mixed use when mixed use was still cool and new 15, 18 years ago, and we were building huge buildings on riverfronts and in downtowns where it used to be industrial. And it was vacant for like 6 years. We had every other building in the downtown because everyone went everywhere else. They filled every other vacancy, but we had these, and we were still considered, not successful. Every apartment upstairs was rented. So I think there's interesting metrics or perceptions. In my case there, I created a marketing group. We brought back the holiday tree lighting. We had the argument, should it be holiday or Christmas? Do we celebrate 8 other things? We did a million things. We got people to open up their stores at the same times. We had concerts. And people still saw this, what we thought was going to be our gem in a community, half empty. It really wasn't. So I do think it's key and important, and I use that example because it was one of my real life examples where people thought I was failing, and I'm like, holy cow, if you look over the last how many years, and I even laugh now when I go back, I'm like, you guys had someone really good doing some cool things like 20 years ago. But they'll still talk about that one vacant building that's now, and actually it's housing the CVB, it's housing some government entities because they had trouble renting it out. And it was weird, right? It was a new building. It was different space. A lot of us have that one restaurant that just never makes it. It's maybe not the location. It's clearly not the food when your 7th restaurant has gone through and it's, the same food that they had at a different location and they were successful. There's weird things to try to figure out like what all those are. And so I'd say the most important thing to me, and from our perspective on the economic development side, is the messaging, the metric, and understanding what your goal and objective is. Because you can not meet metrics and still meet your goals and objectives. You can also meet your goals and objectives and not meet metrics. So it was like a political way of not answering your question at all.
No, I didn't mean to make anything political, but I think we can set metrics, but we have to also communicate. You mentioned marketing, not only marketing to the outside world, but to our citizens, because the citizens, I would venture on a few of these things we've had in the past, most of the council members didn't understand them, so it's not, okay, that's political, but not, if they don't understand them, the citizens don't understand them. So, there's communication is key in marketing, whatever you want to call it, communication, transparency, big points.
I think those are all really good points. I just wanted to chime in because I think, to some of these questions of like, do we have a process? Is it a good process? Things like that. I know we have, actually, perfect timing, Mayor. We have a strategic plan that'll be coming out in, next month, I think sometime. That sets a lot of goals and objectives for economic development, and I think that'll help guide a lot of our processes internally, we had discussions months ago about, especially when it related to ARPA funds, directing that toward affordable housing and childcare were our top 2 priorities in our department. But I do think like having the strategic plan and being able to pin a lot of our work back to that and how we move forward on those goals and objectives will be really, and activities I think will be really helpful to do that. Actually, I think it was a WIDA conference actually, we were talking about processes in terms of development processes, and Randy and I were comparing notes after because we were in 2 different groups. And we were kind of saying it's a little bit like, because there are so many variables to the process right now, it's a little bit choose your own adventure. So we are working on getting that, and both of us being new to the city are working on getting that straight ourselves, honestly. So that's another piece of like this whole process that I think is, I feel like this is a good time to be having this training and to be doing our strategic plan, and just good timing overall because it kind of aligns everything that we're working on, and with newer staff and new council members and new economic development committee, a good time to kind of set these priorities and really clarify what exactly we're doing, and then set the metrics to it as well.
Liz, you're publishing that soon?
The strategic plan?
Yeah.
That's a citywide strategic plan, and so I think, is it May, or I'm sorry, we're in May. Is it June that it's,
I feel like you deserve more than a nod on this. So we would have just presented what we had to all of you, but it feels like that's not the collaborative part. So the past council contributed, so on the 14th, we're going to be asking for your priorities and making sure they get into that strategic plan, so then we'll unveil it.
Awesome. And I think there you hit it on the head, so it's your communication on how you work through those metrics and putting all the pieces together.
Can I add one? I'm going to do a little plug, staff plug. We really need some help communicating that out to the broader public, because right now it just falls to department heads, and we have other jobs that we do. So I think, we've been talking about this, and I know this has been a community conversation for a very long time, but having some type of communications, PR specialist, someone like that on staff at the city would be immensely helpful in kind of basically making a cohesive, comprehensive statement about what we are doing and how we are measuring up. Because as of right now, like I said, it's just fragmented to department heads. And none of us, it's not our full-time job to communicate to the public as much as we would like to be, as transparent as possible and publicly accessible as possible. We need assistance and another position to do that. So that's my staff plug.
Well, and I will say I can give you a couple examples too, and if there's someone you want to reach out to as a council, but that is one of the biggest things we've seen in cities and communities, and I'd say about your size, between 20 and 50,000, up to 100 in the last 5 years, is the need to have someone understand and just manage the TikTok and the Twitter and all the different pieces. I will put a big plug too, and Mayor, if at any point you want to connect with Lori Luther, who's the administrator, she could tell you some pretty cool things. She got a ton of pushback, and I can't tell you in the last 3 or 4 years, especially during COVID, what it was of them having a managing communications PR person that literally worked with her on some things. So if you need any suggestions, we're happy to make some of those connections as well. And Doug, were you going to say something? I might have jumped in there. But yes, I will say it's, this changing times. We see what COVID has done. We've had different changes in the workforce and people working anywhere and can live anywhere. And some people who are saying you have to be back in the office. And we all still don't want our Starbucks to close at 2 o'clock, because I drove around to 6 Starbucks one day. I was also going to an early morning meeting, and I drove around to 7 Starbucks before 8 o'clock, because half of them aren't opening and some places are closing. And not that that's not the perfect example, but then our downtown shops don't open until like 8 o'clock. And I'm like, Jesus, this is crazy. And so here I am with like my 8-year-old or 11 and 13-year-olds in the car, and they're all like, we're hungry and nothing's open. And I'm like, because nobody wants to work. And then my daughter's like, I'm ready. And I'm like, you're 12, like, enjoy life. Find balance. But we joke about our workforce is, do we have to go into the having the baby challenge again? But if we all had babies now, we still would have 18 years of workforce shortages. So that's also not a solution. And so I will say, kind of on that point, I do challenge you, once you have your plan, and talk to other communities and talk to other council people, and make sure you understand your metrics, and then get a way to get it out there and help your staff out. So Before we switch this slide, I guess you made some comments, Liz, but staff, do you feel empowered? I'm not trying to call anybody out here, but I do think it's important to kind of understand your council-staff relationships. Mayor, I don't know if you want to be in the middle and speak on behalf of any of your staff, but does anyone have thoughts? Are there things that could improve? I do like to think that now is the time to have an open dialogue, and I like to be really blunt and honest. Is there anything you would want to bring up now? And if not, we're being recorded, I understand that. Send an anonymous tweet to me and I'll pass it along. Yeah. Sorry, right. Anonymous text message. I'm still working. I need a communications director to help me manage all this new stuff. I don't have it down yet, but anyone have anything to add?
I think Liz kind of mentioned already, but just the process thing, that's something that both of us being new here, that I think we're trying to learn the process, the existing processes, how things have been done in the past before we really start jumping in and trying to make too much changes too drastically. So, but I think there is some room for that in the development process, whether that's on the front end before the RFPs are even going out, but as we're going through the planning process of just trying to find a way of tightening the timeline down from when we start talking about development, when it gets out in the public, to when we see groundbreaking to actually ribbon cutting. Just from being in the public myself and traveling around to different areas, the longer that you see discussion. Once something's announced, people want to see action. They want to see something happening. They want to see a building going up. They want to see the building being finished. Finding ways that we can be more efficient in doing that, I think, is going to benefit the city and everybody around here. So I think those are some of the things that, when the question's asked, that come to the top of my mind at least.
Thank you, Randy. Anyone else? Okay. And I can tell you there's a couple things I like to joke because I tease some of my attorneys because sometimes the city attorney doesn't always agree with some of the things we do in community and economic development. It is interesting to just say, let's talk about what that means if we do have a closed session or we don't, or we have conversations before something's presented. I think as long as we all understand we're working in the best interest of the community, no one's really out there trying to do something. I can tell you now that I'm on the private sector and I work for kind of both sides sometimes because I do represent developers. It's all about money and getting that shovel in the ground, to your point, Randy, and the process. And that's why we kind of talk a lot about the process and is it timely and do people feel the love? Because in the end, right, there is a small piece of that I do just want to feel like you appreciated me or you're glad I was here. And yes, I'm probably asking for $1 bajillion, and I probably have $1 bajillion, and maybe I live in the nicest house in town, or maybe I don't. But there's still a point where I'm willing to make an investment, and I'm taking a risk, and you're taking a risk, and how do we find that middle? So I would encourage you to just kind of think about all those things as you go. Liz, did you have something?
Yeah, I'll just make one other comment about the council-staff relationship. It's kind of a broad blanket statement. Please never hesitate to ask us questions. This is our full-time job. We love the work we do. That's why we're here. So if you have anything that's, a concern or a question before a meeting, please let us know beforehand so that we can address that as timely and as completely and accurately as possible. So I know this is not directed at anybody really in this room, but I'm just saying as a blanket statement, we are always here to help.
I think too, I just want to point this out, that it's an interesting dynamic to be an elected, kind of directing the development here. And sometimes we, and I mean me too, get wrapped up in that politicking in addition to policymaking. And it kind of hurts the discussion and the cause when we as electeds start, I don't know, name calling or like whatever it is, like making our points and beating it so hard that it makes it hard then to recover. And like we might be here temporarily, right? Like we are all elected. We are the whim of the people who put us here. But the staff is here for a lot longer. And it's probably, I mean, it's in our whole city's best interest if we're not slamming the staff. If there are questions, let's get them out and all of that. And it's hard. I know it's hard. I'm an elected too. And I want to politic the heck out of things sometimes. And you got to just sometimes save a little space there for staff and other people.
And I will say, we do bring this up again because we like to talk about this, but I'll give you one of my fun examples is I had a council member who was super supportive, had a developer schmoozing them, loved economic and community development. And we came forward and said, you know, sometimes things are really too good to be true and not feeling so great about this. And the council person just kind of looked at me and she's like, I just don't think you know what you're doing. And I'm like, this is like my job. So first of all, thanks. Second of all, like, I'm a professional and this is what I do every day. So I sure as hell hope I know kind of what I'm doing. Like, we all have bad days. I get that. And then I looked at her and I said, so here's the thing. Like, you hired me to do this. I'm your job. You're a CPA. I have never once come into your office and asked to triple check someone's taxes or their books. I assume that you do a good job at that. So what I'd like you to think is, this isn't my first day. I'm a professional. I have 1 million people at WIDA and other places around the state that help me. So I'm telling you, just step back for a minute. Sometimes when things are too good to be true, they are. And yes, maybe there's a happy medium. Now, I can tell you in that community, the project flopped. It took 5 years. There was litigation. It was a mess. I'm not going to tell you where, but it was in central Wisconsin-ish. It had to do with a hotel and a lot of other things and rehabbing a downtown. But it was an interesting process for me to step up there. And I was like, well, I'm about to lose my job. So here's what I did. And I said it, and everyone just stared at me. And then the administrator was like, thanks for your input. He's a great guy. I love him. And he goes, and I think we do support you. And I just want to be the first one to tell you that. And I was like, thanks. And then like half the rest of the council stepped up and said that to me. And then that person and I met afterwards. I said, hey, I wasn't trying to like bash you, but you're calling me out and this is my job. And like, I'm here. You could have called me before. You could have called me after. You could have said, can we talk about this later? But to do it in the middle of a council meeting, now I have to either look stupid, make you look stupid, or figure out a way to save both of us. And so I will say, to Liz's point there, and again, we're going to bring some of this conversation up one more time because I think this is one of the most important pieces is, you know, we can all be sometimes aggressive. We can all be sometimes passive aggressive. Some of us can also be real handfuls, but maybe try to go in and you focus. As I have one coworker, he loves like, I'm coming in. I just want you to know I'm going to be a handful today. And I'm like, are you saying that because you want to be a handful or because you're going to be a handful? And I think there's a really fine balance to say like, do you want to be a handful or do you want to ask the right questions? Who are you there representing? And do you want to make it happen? Do you not want to make it happen? And try to put all that aside to think of, well, what does work? And what are our professional staff telling us? And how do I feel about this? And what are my neighbors telling me? And right, you have like 90 million things to balance. And it is a process, and you're going to get it wrong sometimes. We all do. Your staff's going to be wrong sometimes, and sometimes they're going to be really right. And sometimes you have to make sure, let me just word to the wise, save that letter that says, in case there is litigation in the end, I don't think this is a good idea. I still have that. I actually keep it on that flash drive, just in case I want to bring it up sometime, in case anyone asks. I'm like, I was not supportive of that project. It was a great one. I loved what the story said, but so taking that to the next level, we're going to dive in here. Does anyone need, I mean, we can take a couple bathroom breaks. Does anyone need water, bathroom break, bio break, whatever they're called these days? We good?
Can I just make the one follow-up
Yeah.
on your, so, I have to walk to the mic. So on that point about, please, if you have questions or commentary, please talk to your staff because they're the professionals. Some of them are certified in whatever their field may be. If you're ever buying produce at the grocery or pumping gas at the gas station and one of your constituents comes up to you and says, what the hell were you thinking voting for this or voting against this? If you ever feel a lack of confidence in answering the question or defending your position, that's a perfect example of where when you communicate prior to the project, during the project, and after the project, where you can understand from the professional planner or the community development person or the economic development person, the reason we are bullish on this or either or for or against it is for these 3 different bullet points. It can be so empowering for you to have that technical information from your staff at your city so that when they do find you trying to find the right bananas, that you're going to be able to just answer your constituent. Now you have one other citizen in your community who understands it, and then guess what? They talk over the picket fence, and they talk at the Thanksgiving table and with their family over dinner, and it just can just spread the knowledge. It's so important in economic development.
Thank you. Good, great example. I will say one time in the TJ Maxx, I was working for the county in the TJ Maxx dressing room. I slid my counter under the door, and we were in the process of Mercury Marine potentially leaving Wisconsin, and they were just talking, and they didn't understand. And I said, I've got some data and some info, and this is my name, and I'm sorry to be creepy weird, but please, here's my business card. And And the lady ended up saying, well, do you have 5 minutes? And I was like, I actually have some brochures in my car. So I ran out and ended up having a chit chat in the parking lot. It was a little awkward, but it was probably the weirdest thing that's ever happened in a TJ Maxx. I hope it's probably the weirdest thing that's ever happened in a TJ Maxx dressing room. But it was good conversation, and I was happy to kind of, as a staff person, talk about why we were doing the things the way we were, and hopefully it helped spread a little bit. Yeah, a lot of misconceptions on that one. We won't even get into that. But this is my example for ethics, so it's a good segue. You all know that there's rules, there's open meetings, there's open records, there's public-private partnerships, there's people who help you. You got to be careful who sees what, who sees when. Every email you send is documented, and then you have to remember that closed session isn't really closed session. Yes, you can talk about all the things you need to talk about in that moment, but in the end, you have to go out and vote and make decisions. I like to use the ethics kind of just to talk through some of those details and see if anyone has any questions. We can tell some of our scary, sad stories. But the intent, right, is that you have the public interest at heart. What does that mean, though? What do we see as issues? People have issues with confidentiality because you want to talk about a business deal, or you're so excited and you accidentally slip to your wife or your husband or your partner or your neighbor and you shouldn't have, and maybe they're part of something else. Or then people question your transparency and say, well, you're not telling us everything. But sometimes it's like, man, I can tell you a couple deals. So I'll use Fond du Lac again. When we had Mercury Marine, one of our legislators and one of our wonderful news reporters really wanted to win an award, and so they went out and flipped some of the news, and we ended up upping by 3, 4, 5, 50 million at the county level, 3 million at the state level, upping what our game was because we were competing with Oklahoma, and they got some of the details out there before we were ready to release them. Not because we were trying to hide anything. Another good example is when you're trying to buy land from someone. I'll tell you, I have one community where we were working on a deal, and we were going to buy some farmland to expand the industrial park. And all of a sudden, the guy next door talked to his wife, who then talked to their brother and heard a story from their sister's uncle's cousin, who was on the council, that maybe they were going to buy some land and farmland. That probably wasn't, it's worth a lot, it's farmland. But in the means of we were going to try to do a transition and build our industrial park over 10, 15 years, land that should have sold at, 8 to 10 was valued at 20, 30,000 an acre, and we would have had a good deal on, all of a sudden was millions of dollars. Those are the crazy kind of stories of things that happen, and all of a sudden now you're not, what's in your highest and best use or best interest of the community doesn't happen. And so we have those stories all over. It does happen. I think there's other times where you're talking about conflict of interest, who do you work for, what church board are you on, blah, blah, blah. A million things that can come into play, and we just need to keep those things in mind as we're thinking about it. I think it's also to remember that when you're in these closed sessions and other times, the people that are in you with that room are at least someone you can talk to. You can help each other out. You can have good conversations. But then make sure you're also not having those conversations or having rolling quorums or doing all those other things that there's so many different rules that tie to this stuff that we just need to be really careful as you're working through details and how you do that. The other thing, in one community right now we have is there's a business that wants to move, and so it's like there's a fine balance between saying, yes, you're welcome in our community, but you're stealing it from your neighbor, and you might have people that work there in your community or vice versa, and you don't want that kind of thing to happen to you. From a United States standpoint, we're not so good. When we are competing in Fond du Lac with Mercury Marine versus Oklahoma, we're still not changing anything in the United States picture, right? We're still going to have a major manufacturer that's here, and now we're competing against ourselves as opposed to not worrying about what Ireland is doing or things that are happening in Mexico or policies that are being driven at a national level as well. And so it is really interesting when you think about these kinds of things to say, man, at our community level, are we focusing on ethics? Are we thinking about confidentiality? Are we making things happen? Are we focusing on developers' agreements, and are they going through the right process? And have we let everyone have their piece? Are staff saying certain things? Is our legal counsel weighing in? And are we trying to find a balance? Because sometimes you're not all going to agree. Sometimes you're going to be on different pages. And you just want to make sure the right thing happens in the end, and it gets out to the public when it's ready to be out there. Half-baked deals and ideas can go bad many different ways. They can go bad and just not happen. They can go bad and fall through. They can go bad and not be successful. And sometimes it's a little bit extra, a little bit more confidentiality, a little bit of time to make sure you're working through all the details and putting all the right pieces together. Yeah.
Just one thing I wanted to add in, Marathon County is a little bit unique in the aspect that we do have a municipalities agreement that states that we won't compete amongst other municipalities. And really where this comes in, we're not going to go to West and we're not going to go to Schofield, Rothschild and say, hey, business, come here, we're going to give you a bunch of incentives. Now, if somebody comes to us and say, hey, we want to move to your business campus, great, we can have those conversations, but it's all about that clear communication. Specifically trying to get at the point where we don't have businesses coming in and trying to bid against different communities. So we're trying to minimize the public assistance whenever we can. We don't want it to be, okay, well, Weston said they give me 8 million. Wausau, will you give me 9 million? And kind of going around that. So that's a bit unique for our area. I know that there's some other agreements like that around the state, mostly non-formal, but we do actually have a formal agreement in place, which makes us a little bit unique. So
That's awesome. That's one of those things that also, I think, puts you up into that advanced category. So that's really great that you can work well together. I think that's the other thing is this is another one of those pieces to say really trust and rely on your staff. Let them have conversations that you don't know about. That's really important. Let them make decisions. Maybe there's a mayor or a key staff person or a key council person where it's in their area that should be looped in or involved. Maybe they shouldn't be involved just for that reason. But make sure you're trusting them and empowering them, going back to that statement that we kind of keep saying over and over, because I think there's a lot of consistency here to say that we're really working on focusing on building a good relationship. I think the other piece is just make sure, again, our final kind of point on this slide is the right information at the right time. It could be totally accurate, but unless it's the right time, the right place, and the right information given by the right person, it's just gossip. So the other thing, again, probably a good and a bad thing. You didn't have any negative perceptions out there in the media. There was no negative information and data. But the media does weigh in. And now that we're in this time of TikTok, and I still don't get the Twitter, right? Nothing, I think, Mary, what did you say? Nothing's Twitter, nothing is...
You wanted to say text and you said...
Yeah, I said Twitter, but nothing is, right? Everyone knows when your info's out there, when you start throwing stuff on Facebook, Twitter, where it came from, who it was, how it got there. Nothing's anonymous, thank you. That's huge now more than ever, and that's changed in the last 5 or 10 years. And your media is out there to win awards and break great news, and sometimes it's not the stuff you always want out there, and they don't do it well. I'd say there's also ways to empower them. And I think this goes back to, Doug, what you said, making sure you know what your metrics are, you're sharing the right message, and it's being communicated well. And then I think the other piece is, every constituent is a voice. You represent a lot of constituents, and then your voice is only one voice. And so it's how we make sure sometimes the squeaky wheel gets the oil or the loudest people are out there. And we were just talking about a project today that's probably going to get 20 people showed up against a project, but there were like a citizen group of 100 that were supportive. No one came and spoke positively about this project. It's a cool project. It's probably not going to happen in this community I'm working in, and it probably should. And it's because no one stood up, because no one cared. We don't need to be there. And then, of course, there were 25 people there who were against it. And so I do think some of those dynamics are very interesting, and as we think about how we get there. Any questions, thoughts, comments on ethics, confidentiality?
Yeah, I've got a question. It's not so much on confidentiality, but just on communication. So I'm of the opinion that if we decide something, say a 6-5 vote, and we're going to move forward with it, everybody should potentially be on, or at least passively be on board with it and not going to the press. So when you get asked, or you get asked by the guy at the gas station, what are best practices for elected officials to respond without over communicating we made a mistake or something like that?
Yes.
In opinion.
Yeah, I mean, and in those cases, a 6-5, in my opinion, is the same as 11-0, right? Like a majority wins and you have consensus, whether you agree or not. My wife didn't want my kids to have dessert last night. I didn't care that they did. She wins in my house. So it was a 6-5 and my kids didn't get dessert. And I just said, I agree with your mom. Now, did I really agree? I'm like, oh, what's a cookie going to hurt? I'm like, but that's kind of, and again, silly analogy, right? But that's what it is. 6-5 is 11-0. 5-6 is 0-11. And that'd be my statement to you, whether you're on the winning or losing side, there's all times that we lose in our lives. It's not a reflection of you. You're all a representation of the city. You're a representation of the constituents and your citizens that you serve. And it may be a bad decision sometimes if it's 6-5 and it means it's 11-0. And you may have been the 5 and you may have been right. Doesn't necessarily mean you always need to say it, I can tell you. There are lots of times I don't tell my wife I was right, even when I was. because we all win when that happens. But that'd be my answer to you. Is 6-5 is the same as 11-0. 5-6 is the same as 0-11. Whether you're on the winning or losing side, you all have to be on the same team, and that's where you kind of suck it up, right? Like, I can tell you a million 90s. I'm a big basketball fan, but when Michael Jordan missed that shot, there were probably 10, 20 other shots in the game or rebounds someone could have made or passes. We all lost when he missed a shot, right? And we all won when he made the basket, and so it's kind of the same concept.
I was just going to add, coming from a lot of nonprofit background, that was always one thing that you're taught both as an executive director and as a board, that no matter what happens, that decision is that of the organization. And so it's the decision of, even if it's a 6-5, it's the decision of the city. And like, if that's a question, usually what I would find easiest was just like, that's the way that the organization or the board decided to go, and just kind of leaving it at that, just without other color comment.
Yeah, and I think that echoes back to staff too. There's decisions that the council or committee may make that we don't necessarily agree with, but we're talking about as a team, that's where we have to step up, and we're pushing that forward. We may not agree with the decision, but publicly we need to support that, and that kind of comes both ways between council and staff.
Thank you, and this is great conversation, so I just want to say I'm glad we're here and having an open dialogue today, because that's the intent of this. So I'm going to dive in and kind of flip through the next few fast, and I think this is some of the feel-good stuff that's really important, and we'll talk about it, but to keep kind of diving into TIF and some other stuff as we go. Downtowns, community centers, outdoor spaces, you guys talked about that when you gave your pitch earlier today to us. That was one of the things that I think all of you said, highlighted, talked about. These things are so important in placemaking now more than ever after the last 2 years, but I'd say even in the last 5 to 10 years, if you think about the brewery tours and bike trails, and we've really seen an uptick of demand in sharing the messaging on how you can hang out in communities and use public spaces better. And God, the last 2 years, especially here, being outside and trying to be outside in the winter, and there's a million things that we can do, and there's always room for improvement, and I'd say you all have knocked it out of the park here in Wausau for the last 20 years. I mean, I think of Jefferson Street Inn and what changed downtown, and now you have the mall, and you're continuing to be a leader in the forefront of making changes. I mean, right in the 80s, malls were the place to be, to hang out in the 90s. Now they're the thing of the past, and we need to figure out how to fill those spaces. And workout centers would never go into malls, and now every mall has a workout center, and there's all kinds of things we can talk about. Downtowns, we've seen interesting conversations on gentrification, and downtowns are dying, and downtowns are vibrant, and now we know more than ever downtowns are so important. We bring hospital leaders, we bring new doctors to town, we bring new people, and they ask, well, where's the best place to eat? Or what does your downtown look like? Because it says a lot about your community. What is your industrial park? Do you have nice curb and gutter? I'm a nerd, like, do you have good drainage? When we think about 2008, 2018, things that have happened in the last 20 years here in Wisconsin, how hard were you hit by natural disasters? There's a million things that we can talk about. And so when it comes down to placemaking, what does your downtown look like? Have you tried different things? Have things been successful? How do I social media post? Can I take a selfie here? Are you engaging your young populations? Are you engaging your older populations? There's a group called 880. And actually, I think we all saw that last week or the last couple weeks. We met with Gil Penalosa, and one of his stories is that it's not 8 or 80 or 8 to 80. It's can an 8-year-old do it and can an 80-year-old do it, right? Can both enjoy spaces. And so I think there's a lot of cool things that we've started to see. Obviously, the last 2 years brought carryout and restaurants not reopening and using our outdoor spaces better. And do you have benches, trails, streets, parks? Liz, I actually use your Milwaukee example all the time of the picnic tables. And here's one of those where I'm like, shut up, because the person who did it can tell the story better. But there's neat programs and activities that have happened all over the state. There's grants and other small things that you can try and do out there. And I encourage you to tap into that and really ensure that when you think about your spaces, be it on the edge of town, partnering with county parks, all kinds of different things that you can be doing, your corridors. When someone drives into town, does it look pretty? Does it look ugly? Those are things that are kind of important. Liz, do you want to tell your cool downtown? I usually use that as one of my examples, but quickly, it was just a neat program to engage different people, all ages, the arts.
Sure, I'll make it fast. It's basically when COVID hit in early 2020, we the bid that I was working for kind of was like, what the heck can we do to help our bars and restaurants, which the majority of the bid was comprised of. and we had this parking lot in the center of the district that was completely unused. So we applied for and received an AARP small dollar big impact grant that allowed us to purchase 10 picnic tables, which then we used to fill the spot, but then kind of not being satisfied with just winning for the restaurants, we decided, well, artists are also out of work right now too. So we put out a call for artists. We contracted with 10 different local artists to do designs on the picnic tables. We had some of them sponsored by other surrounding businesses, and then some neighborhood associations, some other people bought them. So we ended up we ended up adding 60 new seating areas to the center of our district, accessible to every, I think it was 14 bars and restaurants within 2 blocks of the area, and engaged paid local artists to do their work at the same time, and then didn't have to store them. So.
Yes, awesome, and I love that one. I think there's so many others. The other neat thing, I think, as we're talking about placemaking is just remember, and back to that 8 to 80, how are you engaging your high school students? How are you engaging your younger kids? One, maybe they're going to go off to college in a few years, and hopefully they come back. Maybe they want to stay around the area, but what are you doing to make sure they feel? So one of the cool things, City of Platteville did, it's kind of the bottom picture there, but they closed down random, and they did this on busy streets, and they couldn't do it on all the state highways, but they let the high school class each take a parking stall, so it's called a parklet, and they made a parking stall like a different area, and the one you see kind of in the middle on the left, it's sort of hard to see, but they created a mini dog park in a parking space for one day. But it was really cool when we talked to some of their staff, and one of their staff is now on my team, and she said the neat part is there were kids who came downtown who hadn't been downtown in 5 or 10 years, or who hadn't been downtown since they were kids, or just, we have baseball, basketball, 8 million activities that they're doing. They didn't think like, oh, I've never thought about going to the coffee shop for this, that, or the other. And Platteville's not a huge town. But they did a ton of really cool things that brought like 80 different high school students downtown that wouldn't necessarily have been there. They all hung out all day. All their family came. The other thing we've seen is in vacant storefronts, which you have had an amazing vacant storefront program in the past here. But making sure you're using those, a really cool way is just let elementary school students put their art in a window. Why? Because all those people come downtown. And you guys have done a lot of that in the past, but there's very interesting things we've done. We've closed down some city streets the last 2 years to make sure there's outdoor spaces. Downtown Sparta created their own mini kind of Kindle market, farmers market, and continue to grow on what they're doing. And then there's small things like public art and continuing, and you guys do a lot of that, but I'd say don't stop. There's always room for improvement. There's always more things you can do. You've been on the front end and cutting edge and been a leader in downtowns and in public spaces and in how you partner with your neighbors. Don't stop, and make sure you're continuing to be creative. And then the next step I'd say is, wouldn't it have been cool if when I looked up your Twitter, I didn't read about the news, I maybe read that there were kids downtown taking selfies, or what's that next step to make sure all different ages, or what was going on at the senior center today, or seniors, what are they doing in town? Are you creating new pickleball courts? I will tell you, that's probably the biggest thing we've heard in the last 5 years is more pickleball courts everywhere. And remember that the tennis net is a little bit higher, so you can't just paint the lines on the tennis courts because the net is still 2 inches higher and it's not regulation. So I've been in a lot of those conversations the last 2 years. And I've just recently learned how to play myself, and I will say there is a difference. Okay, so point of differentiation, and I do this as another kind of interactive in a moment, but in all of our communities we talk over and over, what is your point of differentiation? We are the Midwest. We are cold in the winter. We are Wisconsin. When we talk about Minnesota or some of our friends, we all have 1 million lakes. We all have access to the river. We have bike trails. We have paths. What is it? Does your business park have rail? That is a point of differentiation. Are you focused on bio, high tech? Do you make really good beer? Do you make really good cheese curds? Is your tourism better? Yeah, I am biased, I can tell you, on the cheese curds and the beer. I judge. But when you think about those kinds of things, when you think about your lakes and outdoors, do you have a kayak launch that's handicap accessible? Do you have a fishing pier that's handicap accessible? When you do your SWOT, or you're all kind of announcing some of your strategic planning and you think of what it is, what are you doing that's different? And so just I kind of have a plan we did here at Veerbeker, but when we talk about a point of differentiation, here's a community that said, like, man, we got to think our planning out better. We aren't big enough to say this is going to be the industrial park and this is multifamily and we got to find ways to do all these kinds of things in small areas. And so they really went out and said, we're putting a conceptual plan together. And before we could we haven't even built a road on this plan that I have here. Our team does, my company does the engineering for the city. But we actually sold 3 lots, and we have developments that we're designing for the private sector for housing, and we haven't even put the roads in the business park. But it was all because of the approach we took. We found out that we were different. We couldn't have an industrial park in a different new subdivision. We just weren't big enough for that, and this is Dodgeville, Wisconsin. And when we promoted ourselves, we realized one of our points of differentiation was we were 45 minutes from Epic. But we could sell houses for almost half the price, or have housing for half the price. And I don't know if you know, and I'm kind of getting in detail about my story here, but this is how we found our point of differentiation. Epic requires that you live within 45 minutes so you can drive into work if there was ever some reason that they need you there.
Does everyone know who Epic?
It's a company in Madison, Wisconsin. So they're, if you ever had MyChart or you go to the doctor, those things, they're the software company behind that. They have gone from what was 6 people in a garage in their house to now 15,000 people. All those 15,000 people have to live within 45 minutes of Verona. Epic was on the edge. We figured out that was our point of differentiation. We could build a bunch of different housing. We could have some small commercial options. We could have an industrial park and mini warehousing, which is also huge everywhere right now. And we can make it all happen in one area. And we did it right on the edge of town where we knew people could still live to be within 45 minutes of Epic. So we could do some small single-family homes. The other big thing about people who work at Epic is they travel a lot sometimes. So we also allowed duplexes with 0 lot lines and a handful of other neat, cool zoning changes that the community hasn't done a lot of. Not far from a newer subdivision as well, but we were kind of creative on all the things that we could do, and we kind of threw it out there. So my one question to you is, as you think now, and not to put anyone on the spot, but if you think about it, right, we're Wisconsin. It's cold in the winter. It's beautiful on a day like today, but thank goodness for the wind. And what is your point of differentiation? What is, and you all here work so darn well together. Like, some people even know, and I mean this in the most sincere way, the difference between Rothschild, Rim Mountain, Wausau, it's the same area. But when people come here, they Google you, or we think about your long-term growth and objectives, try to find different ways to be different. Do you allow 0 lot line zoning? To me, Live It Up Wausau, super cool example. Why I loved it, because that's something really neat. That, to me, is a huge point of differentiation. And so as you're going through your strategic planning, as you're telling your story, you're realizing what your both physical and non-physical assets are. Make sure you're telling that makes you a little different. I joke, but my good buddy's the administrator, and Wanakee is the only Wanakee in the world. And he goes by that all the time, right? There's a million different things going on in Wanakee. He's got a handful of developments, some of the same people that are doing developments here. But he goes around and he says, what's our point of differentiation? We're the only Wanakee in the world. Now let me tell you why. And then he tells his story thereafter. But he finds a good way to kind of drive you in, pull you in. So if anyone has any thoughts, if you can think of something that's different here, otherwise something to put in your kind of playbook for later. All right, we'll keep clicking through. Preparedness, again, if we haven't learned things in 2008, and I know you all weren't hit as bad as some other areas of the state, but you've been hit in the past, are you just prepared? Have you thought about that? There is a community and economic development prepared book that the feds require. All states usually prepare these. Wisconsin Emergency Management works together. But this is kind of a precursor to my next slide that's not about preparedness and about just how you all work together. But do you know if something happens, who's the first call? Is it the mayor? Who does the mayor call in next? Do you have a good disaster response? If there's flooding, if there's a tornado, if something happens, if there's COVID, how did you pull that team together? How did you decide which businesses were allowed to be open? Who was essential? Gosh, we won't get into that drama, but someone needs to still have those conversations in your communities. And you need to know who that is. And as a council person, you don't necessarily need to be on the team, but you need to know who's having those. So I'm going to kind of keep flipping through, and I want to get to the next slide. But diversity, equity, inclusion, and engagement. I like to tell just kind of one story, because there's the whole theory behind diversity, equity, inclusion, or diversity and inclusion, and how do you explain what it is. So it means lots of different things to lots of different people. It means old people, it means young people, it's sex, it's ethnicity, it's sexual orientation, it's religion. It's making sure everybody feels welcome. We know all the acronyms, and we talk about different things, and we've seen Black Lives Matter and different people of color and the movements, and making sure everyone has a place in your community. But the one thing I like to talk about, and I think where we're going and where we're seeing it's heading, is I like to tell my story about the dance. So diversity is that you have a dance and everyone's invited. Inclusion is making sure when someone comes to that dance that you ask them to dance. Now, it doesn't stop there, and I think that's where, historically, it's really good if we can just have a dance and everyone's invited and everyone gets out there. Where you as a community can make a difference, and where we talk about engagement and taking the next steps, and when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, it's Wisconsin, right? We're having a polka. So did you ask if Randy liked a polka? Did you find out if he liked country music? Maybe it's rap. And did you, instead of at the polka just playing polka music, did you play something else? Or if you decided, hey, it's Wisconsin, no, we're going to have a polka, did you have a stump fiddle building activity? Does anyone know what a stump fiddle is? Thank you. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Not everybody gets that joke, but I mean, it's not really a joke because it's serious, but did you have a stump fiddle building activity at the community center the week before so people could show up with their stump fiddle? Did you teach lessons on Tuesdays and Thursdays? And did you do it at the elementary school and the community center? There's a whole nother moment of belonging that we're tying to diversity, equity, and inclusion as we talk about that to make sure everyone's invited. Is it free or is it affordable? Can anybody get in? Was it promoted in different places? Did you tweet about it? Did you post it at the library? Did you post it at the all the different places that you're supposed to put things? And so it is interesting as we continue to think about what that means is that there's ways to not change tradition. You can still have polka every Wednesday night. But I can tell you, when we think about things that are dying or aren't active anymore, if you were teaching polka on Tuesdays or Fridays or in different places at the church, at the bar, at the senior center, in the elementary school, in PE class, you may have more people showing up to polka on Wednesdays and talking about it. And maybe you did a polka to a rap song, or, I mean, we can all talk about Hamilton and other things that have changed how we see music and arts and activities, but there's different ways that you could do things. Make sure everybody knows what a stump fiddle is and that they have one. And so there's these neat different steps, I think, that especially at your level, you can think about how you're doing things when you're approaching things, and that you're taking it to that next level to say, are we making sure everyone feels involved? Are we feeling like they belong? Did we ask them to dance? Did we make sure they were invited? But did we take it to that next level? So I'm going to kind of summarize after those last couple of things. We talked about resiliency. I talked about placemaking. And again, this goes back to some of those conversations we had in the past. We're thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion. And maybe we've already beat this a few times over, but when we talk about, are you all on the same page? This is that consensus. Did you empower your staff? When you go back to this, who is the team? Do you know who the captain is on the team? And as you kind of push all these pieces together, are you all on the same page? It doesn't mean you agree. Again, 6 to 5 is the same as 11 to 0. 5 to 6 is the same as 0 to 11. And so you kind of, I was saying that we're going to talk about this a lot, but we talked about this in placemaking. You don't have to agree. You don't have to think downtown's the best place to be, but you need to be on board if everyone else is. If you think it should be a country line dance instead of a polka, then get on board, or maybe do both. Sometimes there's ways to solve those problems. But again, I wanted to kind of get to the place that make sure you're empowering your staff, make sure you know who the captain of the team is. As you're going through decision making, and it could be, we're going to dive more into developers agreements and other things in the end, but I really want you to think about these things as we kind of finish through the rest of the day here. So on that note, I think now would be a time just to take a good quick little break, unless no one wants to stop. But does anyone need to run to the restroom, take a pause? I can keep going. I think we have about 45 minutes left. We're going to go through a little bit faster than others, but this is, again, some of the stuff we try to be consistent on an international level. If you were learning this in a different state or we were having this conversation, that we say some of the same things that are said everywhere. Not that we don't have good secrets here in Wisconsin that we want to keep, because we do, but I'm going to flip through some of these things a little bit faster so we can dive into some other meaty details as we go. So business visits, we talked a little bit about relationship building in businesses, and this is one of my pictures. We stole this from some of our folks who do what we do at WIDA over in California. And one of the things they like to talk about is a successful community has successful businesses, and if people have jobs, people can take care of other things. And so there's a really interesting dynamic between your community and economic development team and making sure that as a municipality, you are also connected with your business community, and some of that falls to someone like a Liz who's like, I already have 9 million things on my plate, and now you're going to throw something else on there, right? But it's important if someone's mad that they don't have a walkway into the industrial park because people can't walk to work, or this is where someone gets dropped off, or there's all kinds of things we could talk about. And again, we're not going to weigh into this heavy, but I like to kind of show these pictures a little bit about kind of what it means. So successful businesses means people have jobs, people can pay their bills, they can pay their taxes, they can pay their utilities. economic developers sometimes are sort of intertwined in making sure that they're that person that makes the connection to the formal government municipal piece. And so making sure that people know if there's barriers, they know that there's resources about there, they understand your strategic plan and what that means for businesses. And sometimes companies don't mind paying their taxes as much when they feel the love, if I'm being honest, right? I mean, it's like anything, if you feel involved or part of the process, maybe some of it's not so painful in the end. Again, and going back into, you can invest if you have good businesses, you have good utilities, people are investing in your citizens, people have places to work, then they're hopefully also investing in many other things in your community. We're going to jump through this. One of the things that we talk about in economic development is creating a business visitation program and having your municipality reach out. Maybe it's 5 businesses a year. In the communities we work in and the teams I'm on, we push a lot of just make sure you're meeting with your top 5 businesses every year, or at least know who's on the team, who to call. Should they call the mayor? Should they call Liz? If you have a question, do you call your district alder? What's the best process that you want to have in place? Going back to, again, what's your process? Do people know how it is, and are you communicating it well? You know, there are sometimes things, a good business retention program sometimes has volunteers, because sometimes someone won't tell the city how they're feeling, but they tell a volunteer, yeah, I'm just not thrilled about this thing that happened, and this is why. And then the other thing is just to find out, is there a red flag? So we have had COVID, we've had a lot of businesses that haven't opened back up, or restaurants that are only still not doing delivery. Why is it? Is it because they're having issues? Is it because they can't find staff? Is it just because it's easier? But there's red flags too to figure out. We've heard of lots of different things in Wisconsin, and you know, do family-owned businesses still have succession plans? Well, man, maybe there's someone in the community that would be willing to buy, and they're not just going to close. There's all kinds of different stories that we have like that, and so it's in a community's best interest to reach out to your businesses. Now we're going to dive a little bit more into kind of projects and activities. Who's a developer? The reason I ask that is because my neighbor owns 3 rental properties. I would consider him a developer. Yes, he's not building, and I live in Madison area, he's not building 100 and 300 units downtown, but he owns 3 rental properties, and if he does well, it might be 4, and he may buy a duplex thereafter. And sometimes in our small towns, someone who owns a building downtown who may not live here, or who might, or who just rents it out, is still someone who's a developer and invested in your community. And so it is really important that we understand who a developer is, that it's big and small, and that we're treating them all equally. It's hard. It's hard sometimes to treat the big ones nice, and sometimes it's hard to help the small ones. But it is interesting as you kind of go through your process and understand what your policy is do you have some sort of policy that's out there? We're going to talk about TIF in a minute here. But as you think about that, what is it? How are you helping? Is it just someone there to talk them through technical assistance? Is it incentives, et cetera? You know, do you allow if someone wants to close down a street in a downtown or in a business area, or change their parking for an activity or an event? Just some flexibility in making sure that businesses feel heard. And then when you think of developers, not everyone owns their building, and who are those people that are making investments in your community, and who are those people that you're then ensuring responding well to violations and ordinances, and are you finding ways to assist them and help them and be flexible as they make their changes? So now we're going to dive into public funding, kind of the toolbox and TIF. We call this one money, money, money. Because in the end, and I'll have a couple I think are little funny slides here. There's all kinds of perceptions that are out there. Some of them are true, some of them are myths. There's grants and money everywhere. Now I will say we're in an unprecedented time where there's more money that's been thrown out due to ARPA and other things that we'll ever see in our lifetime again. There's a heck of a lot of us that didn't have good plans in place, so we weren't able to take advantage of it. There's a lot of rules that the feds have changed back and forth between opportunity zones over the last 5 years to diving into how we use ARPA funds and now bill. And everybody, of course, wants to get their roads paid for if they can. And so it's been an interesting time. But when we talk about you and diving into municipal funding, my favorite day is when you're a newly elected official and you're in that, September, October, November, and you're like, holy crap, we're like literally in charge of the budget at the city. It's kind of like when I'm like supposed to balance the checkbook and I never do, and I'm like, man, it would have been nice if I knew the whole picture before I dove into this. But that's one of my favorite meetings when I was staff, was like, there's so many people here who are like, we really do go through the full budget, and sometimes those are long, painful meetings, and we need to figure out where we're making cuts. And what I will say to that is that it's really important when you have good policy, when you do good capital improvement planning, and you think ahead, having a 3 to a 5 year plan, it all goes back to that plan. It goes back to your process. It goes back to, are your staff informed? Do you empower them? Are you taking their suggestions? Yes, everyone wants to make sure we have a million different things, and we have parks, and we have good roads, and sometimes you're in charge of police and fire, and you have to think about all those other things, but there's different pieces, and we need to make sure everyone's heard, but everyone gets to weigh in, and if you're doing things well, and you're planning ahead, and you're following your objectives, it does make public funding a lot easier. So then who are your other partners that you should also make sure you're pulling in and engaging in and sometimes investing in? The Convention and Visitors Bureau obviously has money that comes to them from certain things like room tax. Your Main Street or your downtown area or your chamber, and again, some of these are nonprofits. So when you're thinking about how all this works together, if everyone in your circle, if all of our widgets and gadgets weren't aligned in those cogs that I showed you on the first slide, if one of them isn't moving, then none of them are moving. And so it is important as you kind of put all those pieces together, ensure that you're meeting with others as you put the pieces together. The next piece, and we're going to dive into some of these in a little more detail, is programs for funding. In Wisconsin, we're handcuffed a little bit. Our Constitution says that we cannot tax abate in the state of Wisconsin. There are lots of states like New York and Illinois that have decommissioned and unregulated utilities that are allowed to tax abate, that are allowed to just say you don't have to pay your taxes, and hey, we're going to throw some money at you, and don't have to use TIF, and can give stuff away. We don't have that here. Our one big tool in our toolbox is obviously we can do loans and grants, and we can get creative and sometimes charge taxes or not charge taxes, or and when I say taxes, I mean like Milwaukee County Park, if you remember back in the day, and then Miller Park, or now AmFam, or what they're doing in Lambeau, or ensuring things are funded. We can do different things tied to room tax, so the Convention and Visitor Bureau has those. You can do it for convention centers. There's lots of different ways to do that, but really in Wisconsin, we have TIF, tax increment financing, and tax increment districts, our TIDs. That's the only way we can give away money or grant or whatever you want to call it. And so we're going to dive into that a little bit here. Why is public funding important, and why are we having the conversation today? It's a benefit to communities. I can tell you, when you think of a metric to use, and this is a good one, think of money you give and how much does that leverage in private sector investment. So for $1 million, you got a $40 million riverfront. That's a huge, right? Like if you said to me, hey, I'm going to invest $40 if you give me $1, well, that's like a no-brainer. Heck, 4 to 1 is a good investment, and we've seen some of those numbers change since 2008 and 9. It was like 4 to 1. If you could get that in 08, 09, 10. Now we're seeing again 13, 14 to 1. 7 to 1 was good back in the early 2000s. And so there's some interesting dynamics as you think of public funding. But in the end, if you can invest less than half, and we like to say public sector funding should usually be 30% or less. 35% is kind of how the state likes to look at things when they think of, man, are we going to help you on things? But that's a great way to look at, are we stimulating the economy? Are we helping make investments? Are we helping implement our strategic plan? Does it hit our goals and objectives? And I hope some of this is overlapping and you kind of understand why we talk about it and do it in the order that we do, is because we want things to happen. We want you to meet your goals. We want projects to get completed. And that's kind of how we continue to layer on all these concepts and ideas. So hopefully it's just a lot to take in. I'm aware of that. But hopefully it's kind of a lot of repetition and you're sort of understanding from our perspective and why we do things the way we do, why we do them, or why we are doing things the way we do them. And then public purpose. I think there's a lot of different things when we talk about public purpose, but when you need to think of your goals, objectives, and ideas and how you hit those, why are you doing it? Is it blight elimination? Are we meeting some sort of, maybe it's CDBG or federal standard or USDA or whatever it is? Do we have, market rate housing? Do we have affordable housing? Have we thought about the environment? Do we have recreation? Is it health and safety? There's so many different things that we do, and I like to think that they're all part of economic development. But explaining public purpose is important. Capital improvement planning, like I said, when you think about going into budget period, I think communities that are the most successful are those that have 3 to 5 year plans. They understand small goals. They understand what the next 3 to 5 years in the future holds, recognizing that crazy things can happen, that we are not in control of, like a natural disaster or COVID or whatever. But we need to ensure that we're still properly planning for improvements that need to be made. And this is really, really important tied to public funding, because if you can plan out well, you can then take advantage of using public funding programs, other grants and loans and things that are out there, or just strategically plotting through how you use the money that you have from a general fund standpoint. And so one of the things that, and a shameless plug here, but I did share with you, Liz, is that we kind of put together for communities is called this public funding bulletin. We don't give this to everybody, although it is on our website, but people don't click this deep usually. But it just talks about all the different grant and loan programs that are out there, deadlines, things that you could be looking into from DOT to CDBG to the state level to federal programs. And then on the back, we just have kind of a cheat sheet for TIFs to think about when you're looking at projects. And so we'll have access to that. I'll have a link at the end, and Liz can always send it out to all of you too, but I did send that to her. And it's something that I think it's nice for when I was a city staff person. Boy, I wish I would have had that in front of me, just to think of some of the things that were out there, both on the public works side, community economic development. And so it's really important, and the reason we put that together as a company is because if you're kind of packaging all these things together and you're thinking about October doesn't have to be so scary or annoying or long or hard for staff and council and everybody else to kind of put the pieces together. So funding strategies, a couple of the things that have changed over the last couple of years and that we like to talk about are being creative. Like I said, our one tool in the toolbox is TIF in Wisconsin. There are a couple different extensions that you can use. The newest one that we've seen a lot on is the affordable housing extension. Highly recommend utilizing that and finding ways to figure out how people are spending hopefully not more than 30% of their income on housing. And there's a lot of places that I think numbers have just changed based on what we pay as average income and median household income in communities versus what residential costs have gone up drastically and not necessarily tied to inflation. And goodness knows what the next 6 months and next year are going to look like based on what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 months or 6 months here in 2022. So really tapping into taking advantage of that if you can. Also, TID surpluses, creating interesting revolving loan funds, investment funds. If you have a community development authority or redevelopment authority, taking advantage of redevelopment plans and tapping into resources that you have made available through that. There's also land banking, land sale, and pass-throughs, and some interesting ways to be creative to say, hey, maybe we can move you out, sell some land, take advantage of it, finding ways to be creative on our financing. We've done some interesting things up in Marathon City on that. And so there's some neat ways to see just development happen. As we talk about then new legislation and other opportunities, this is where I push a little bit harder on you to don't be afraid to reach out to your legislators. When you think about TIF and the advocacy piece, we're here for you, we're lobbying, but man, the best way to lobby is for you to call your legislator. Heck, you're not afraid, and they're sure as heck not afraid to come and show up to take a picture or to talk about a ribbon cutting or something else. They should also be there to listen to you when you're like, what are we doing for this? We had a program called CDBG Close that was for small revolving loan funds. It was called the Small Cities Program back in the day. I can tell you if local people and elected officials were reaching out to our legislators and, you know, the busy bees like myself and Mary, who were actually part of that program for years at the state, would have maybe heard from more constituents, maybe we would have changed how we closed that program out or the modifications we made or how we're doing disaster recovery. I think WEDC is a great example. We both worked there. If you think about community investments and don't be afraid to say, hey, it's really great that you are helping us, or boy, this is where our downtown or whatever it is could use help, and reaching out to your legislators to tell them. At some point, they have to listen. I joke all the time, I love sending in and filling out the form and just writing my thoughts and comments on things that I hear or weighing my opinion in. And so I would encourage you to do that. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the end again. But I think that's one thing to remember is staying on top of some of that stuff. And heck, if you have nothing to talk about, just call them and say, hey, I'm in Alder here. What happens in Wausau is important to me, and I hope it's important to you too. That can be really simple statements. Oops, am I frozen? Oh, there we go. Was that you or me?
I'm not entirely sure. It
Me
might have
neither.
been simultaneous.
The other thing I like to laugh about is if you're up at night, you've probably seen the guy with the dollars or the question marks on his jacket, and now I think he's written a new book and it's dollar signs on his jacket. But I cannot tell you when I was staff at all different levels how many calls I used to get about, well, do you have this free and who can help me? And boy, I would get letters and all kinds of, when people used to write letters instead of emails, requests that came in. And I kind of like to joke about like grants and loans and some of these programs and some of this economic development stuff we do is like the Wizard of Oz. Like it's just me sitting there behind a microphone, but whatever's in front of me is this beautiful picture that I've painted. And then you pull it back and you're like, oh, there's Melissa telling us this story. That's kind of how some of the stuff that we do works. This is sometimes how I feel like TIF sometimes is hard to explain, but it's happening and it's cool and it's awesome and the wizard's voice sounds ominous and hopefully everyone's happy, but that's not how it always happens. And then on the flip side, I think everyone thinks there's grants or loan funds, or now that we've had ARPA and some of this other stuff out there, like we're in an unprecedented time and it's not that easy to start a business or to get funding or to invest in a startup or fund our entrepreneurs. And so we do have to remember that as we're thinking about all these things and what our goals and objectives are, like, do we have something that can help people get to that next level? It's great to say I want 95% occupancy in my downtown. Do you have a small business program? Do you have a facade improvement program? Are you investing in your roads? Did you build a new business park? Do you make sure that you have, the proper utilities run? Do we have access to good broadband? There's a million things, little things, right, that every staff person is maybe in charge of 10 or 100 activities that then fall into those million things that you need to do to be a good municipality. And so I just remind you, I like to use this picture to think, like, sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's not right, and sometimes it's a lot easier than you think it is. Like Melissa standing in front of a microphone making suggestions isn't as this big story like The Wizard of Oz. And so just kind of a reminder, like, this is what people see, and then there's that back to perception is reality. How do you put all the pieces together? Oh, maybe I'm not clicking again. There. Thank you.
Yep.
And again, there's a lot of grants, and I do say, what's the myths, what's the reality? There are a handful of programs out there. That's what this kind of flyer that I put together and handed over to Liz that we talk about. But don't be afraid to look into, Liz, you mentioned, and I love telling your story about when you're in the Milwaukee bid, AARP, there's small $1,000 grants that it's called the Big Impact, small dollar. Like, you can do big things. We obviously have had the ARPA and the money that's come out that's once in a lifetime. WEDC has community investment programs. There's USDA. There's a million places that we can kind of tap into, or I shouldn't say a million, but there really are a ton of programs out there. Maybe one or two of them are going to fit you and your need and your goals and objectives. So don't spend a ton of time on it, but try to find the right resources. Use WEDA, use other partners, use your WEDC representatives, use your county people. Make sure you're just kind of reaching out and making good connections and following up on understanding what's out there. And if you as a council, where I think this is the most important, has an idea, don't be afraid to ask staff about it. And Andrew, I think you brought up an awesome question or point. Just as much as you as council can reach out to your staff, and I don't know, Mayor or Liz, if you guys, how you do certain things, but in a few of the communities in the past, we've kind of said every quarter, can we talk about a division? Do people know that, there's in a community like this, you probably have hundreds of staff people, and you can't know every one of them, but you should know who to reach out to or how you can connect with them or not be afraid. And if something's happening in your block or in your district, they shouldn't be afraid to drop you a note either. Obviously, respecting public records and how things get out there, but just understanding that good lines of communications work both ways, and don't be afraid to ask certain questions. Or is there free money out there? And staff may tell you no, but maybe there is. Can you click me? I don't know what's going on. There we go. And again, so one piece we like to look at, just kind of recognizing what this means, and specifically when we talk about economic development, there's the local piece. So that's you. Do you have a TIF? Do you have a TIF policy in place? Are you fair in implementing it? Do you all understand how it works? And we're going to dive into that a little bit. Are you treating most developers equally? Even if you don't love the project, even if it's 6.5 or 5.6. Are you taking advantage of RDAs, community development authorities? You have revolving loan funds. Some of that has gone by the wayside with some of the policy changes that have been made at the state level. Are you embracing your main streets and bids and figuring out what your bonding authority is and thinking of different ways you can use not only GPR or general fund dollars, but also then partnering with WEDC's, our state economic development agency. They have a handful of things that serve communities and businesses and entrepreneurs, and they could be a great partner, including Main Street and whatnot. Then when you think of the state level, there's DNR, DOT, a million places. Again, different agencies literally have thousands of staff that do different things that could potentially help you. And then we talk about the federal level. And so there are other public sector resources that are out there. So it's more of to make you feel like you're not alone. Because in the end, I know during budget time, you sure as heck do feel that way. I know I did when I was staff and have been on the other side of it. But there's different things to kind of look into, tap into, and as you go back to that plan and you think about what your goals and objectives are there actions that connect you, maybe connecting to some of these resources. Apparently the clicker works again. Then again, talking about toolbox. Like I said, one of the biggest tools that you have that kind of has that grant and free money out there that we talk a lot about is TIF and TID, and we're going to dive into that in more detail. But you use your general obligation, there's potential utility districts. Sometimes you have bonding that you can do, revolving loan funds. Maybe you're charging fees or special assessments or you have a bid, but there's not a ton of flexibility in any of this stuff, right? Like what you do is kind of tied to one of these areas, or you're specifically talking about general fund dollars. And so we really like to just talk about that toolbox and then dive into the details of TIF and how you can take advantage of that. The other thing we mentioned are revolving loan funds. Sometimes it helps businesses, sometimes it builds out business parks, sometimes it's for housing. There's a lot of different ways that you can develop in your communities and find different ways. It's harder to build these funds up, but once you get them going, the intent is that they revolve. So you start getting loans out there, you find different ways. Maybe you just invest a little bit in the downtown every couple of years. You invest $5,000 to $10,000 to $50,000 into programs that you eventually build up. 5 or 10 years of $5,000 to $50,000 get you up to 100. You know, over a 10-year time period, maybe you could have a $500,000 program. Now we're going to really dive into TIF. So before we do, does anyone have any comments, thoughts, ideas, suggestions? We're going to wrap up hopefully in 10 minutes here, but talking about TIF and just diving into tax increment financing, the difference between TIF and TID. A TID is a thing, it's an area, it's a district that can define it. Tax increment financing is a tool. So I can tell you the district, it's a geographic area. Tax increment financing is a tool, or it's the way we can potentially get money out of that district into people. It was Wisconsin statute, it is authorized, it's been around since the 70s. Some changes have been made and modified over the last few years. When we talk about what is a TIF, again, I think I've talked about this a lot, but the intent is industrial development, blight elimination, rehab or conservation, mixed use, environmental remediation, which we've seen some changes on. And then there's some different things that you can do, but you're a city, so these are kind of the important ones as we talk about it. But the intent is really to either help rehab, build up an area, take a greenfield. And then there's this really big thing called the but-for clause that when we talk about it, and so I'm going to go through some of the basic definitions, but I'm going to share some pictures that I think are easier as we kind of go. But the one piece I want to mention is the but-for clause. But-for, so without the TIF, if we didn't do TIF, would this happen? And there is a small caveat in there, and I say this as a staff person who liked to take full advantage of my TIFs when I could. But for, did it happen faster? Did it happen better? So is this maybe? Yes. Is the riverfront eventually going to be developed in 20 years? Sure. But if we made an investment, could we get a really good project, a project that we really like, something that we really need, something that aligns with our plan? So there is a fine line. The state monitors your but-for, making sure that you ask it. They have a joint review board and a handful of other things that are required as part of TIF to ensure that you're meeting those requirements. But in the end, you need to feel good. It needs to pass your smell test and understand why you do it. So the question is, like I've done projects in communities, well, yeah, I could have, right? I could sell anything and we could build anything there, but without us investing in this TIF, we wouldn't have got 100 new housing units and some commercial space, or a new downtown building because it burned down in another community we were in, or an environmental remediation. So I'm going to real quick just talk through some pictures that I think help me and hopefully kind of helps you understand TIF, and maybe some of you are better at this than others, but here's a great example. So we had an old site in a community. It had a couple old buildings on it. The property taxes were only generating $2,500 per year. The entities that are all impacted by this, right, that receive property taxes or taxes in general from this property are the city, the school district, the county, and the technical college. And that's a basis for how some of them create their general fund. And as you look at this property was assessed at and I'm using a mill rate of $25 per thousand because it's easy, what I call Melissa math. That might not be totally accurate, but I can understand it. So the property is assessed at $100,000. The mill rate is $25 per thousand, so I'm getting $2,500 per year in taxes. This area could be undeveloped without public services. It could have been blighted. There's a lot of things that could be wrong with this. In the end, we want to use this property. It's in a nice area of town. It's a central corridor, or a corridor coming in before you hit the central city. We need it to look nicer. If we made some investments, it's underutilized, and without or but for TIF, who knows if it would get cleaned up. So what we did, if I can get my clicker to work, thank you. Yep. Is we looked at the tax base, and now, how did you tell me where my, is there a laser on here?
Oh, yeah. Got a laser.
Oh, nice. I love these things when they have, everything works in our favor. So here's the tax base right here when the district was formed. Man, I'm like shaky here. but it's, if you see kind of where this black line is here and the colors are below. So this is the tax base, day one, right here. And all these people were receiving that $2,500 in taxes right here. Everyone is going to continue to receive that $2,500. So if we didn't do anything there, the property, it actually might deteriorate. They may not even get $2,500. It may go down. It may be down to 24, 23, 22 over 5-10 years. So it's like, man, we need to clean up this property, right? Or there's better utilization. And so we say, all right, we're going to create a TIF. And we created a TIF this day. We had a joint review board meeting, which is one person from each of these groups, and then someone from the local municipality and a citizen who comes in to say, yes, this all makes sense. Hopefully you pick a good one that kind of understands what's going on, but there are good consultants that can tell your story as well. I'm biased. But you had this group of people that met and said, yep, we're okay with the TIF, it makes sense. If we don't do something here, we got the but for, we need some development. And so what we start now is we create this baseline on day one, and this is that baseline. So everybody's still getting their taxes, so no one can really be that pissed about it because, heck, maybe nothing happens and it actually decreases. Yeah, well, so there's actually a legislator who loves forgetting to tell this part of the story, but as Mary said, this is something that can kind of get spun in the media is no one's really losing anything in this case. What we're doing is gaining some increment, and so this is this little triangle here that's gray that we call the increment. Tax increment financing or tax increment district. This is the new money that however much revenue is generated or taxes are generated every year, we keep in this little pot, which is in a separate fund, but it's all still part of the books of the city, and we keep it in this TID, or in this district. And we generate those dollars then to maybe pay for infrastructure, pay to tear the building down, maybe we sell the land, maybe we give a developer incentive. There's lots of things that we can do. That is the coolest part about what we have in our Wisconsin law is you can give money away. You can decide it's tied for infrastructure. You can kind of do the different things. But the intent is to say, without this investment, without this money, we're going to still sit at this baseline, maybe even less. How do we generate taxes that at the end of whatever that is, so maybe it's the 22 years or 27 years or whatever our district create, in industrial development, for example, it's 20 years. Mixed use, we can go out to like 23. But here, we get up to this point here, all of a sudden the TIF ends, and this is all the money that all those taxing bodies are getting because of the investments made. And so I've got a picture to kind of help you explain it. So again, this was that, oh man, now I'm going backwards. Oh, with the laser pointer, this thing works better. We needed to have that on the whole time. Now we know. And so I like to think this is actually one of my projects that I did, but we call it the napkin analysis, and maybe it's kind of hard to see, but here's the costs of a new TID. There was cleanup, there were incentives, we needed to get the project ready, and I'm going to explain this in more detail on the next pictures, but man, by generating new tax income and then looking at the expenses that were made, we actually generated new revenue of $1.9 million. We expended funds of $1.75 million. We actually had $150,000 left to play with in the end, and I'm going to show you the picture that's kind of tied to that. So now here, remember we were at $25,000 or $2,500 per year. Everyone is still continuing to get their $2,500 over here. But we've been able to now develop. So in this case, we did it was offices in the back. We had they were like lighter industrial. This was like a little restaurant, and this was an office building in the front on one of the sites that we developed in a smaller community. And this was a mixed-use TIF that we used, but you could do any kind. So in this example, I could tell the story differently as well. But what we ended up doing is, like I said, we had environmental remediation, we had demolition, we put new utilities, we ran in the parking, and we helped everything to get that site shovel-ready and even gave a little incentive to make sure we helped the developer make it happen. We invested $1.75 million in funds. I'm going to show you now kind of in my next slide or picture here, but in year 3, we started to generate revenues. And we were averaging about $150,000 in taxes per year. By year 15, we were generating $300,000 in property tax. So when you kind of keep going on my story here, now the district dissolves. There's no TIF anymore. Remember, we were at $2,500? We're now at $302,500 per year in taxes that all these entities are generating. So that's where we talk about what the value of TIF is. So you do a basic calculation, and this is, again, very, very basic. This is not like what the elders of the world or even my team or others do, but I wanted to break it down to kind of make sense. So in this sense, in this example that we used, we were collecting property taxes of $2,500. In this sense, we actually acquired the property at the community level, so we were getting 0 in property taxes for these 2 years. And then we we utilized the increment. We weren't getting any because there was nothing there for those 2 years. And then we started seeing property tax value was $62,000. And we started generating increment because remember, the amount of taxes we were pulling in was $62,500. Now, the $2,500 still goes to the one taxing, the entities, the body. So they're still getting their $2,500 every year, but now we have the $60,000 extra in increment. So when you do the math here, we had about $2 million in the end of increment that we could use, and this was the expenses. So we bought the land and did cleanup for $1 million. We gave a developer incentive of $500 to build the first buildings because the first one's always the hardest. Then we did another incentive and did some infrastructure for $250. So we ended up generating $2 million, and the costs we incurred were only $1.79. Now there's other things I forgot in there, like we did have to write the TIF plan, and we had to pay a consultant to do our annual reporting. But all in all, you can see those costs are minimal, $5,000, $10,000 a year. We made that up in our other $200,000 extra that we had. So the intent really is just to kind of give a breakdown of looking at TIF, trying to say that, you know, hopefully those pictures help paint a little bit of a picture about why it's important, what you use it for. And then talking about, there's just 2 different ways, and we've seen some changes in how communities use this. So you can borrow and utilize your TIF and slowly pay it off. So you're kind of paying your own debt off, using the increment to pay yourself back, and you kind of eat that as a community. But in the end, the TIF pays for itself, so you incur all those costs back, and you just and you have a good auditor and a good accountant that helps you through that process. Then what we've kind of seen that's changed. That's where I'm going right now. And then the other big change that we've seen is in the past, we used to even see people would take on big GO bonds because they'd make investments and say, here you go, developer, here's your $500,000, make it happen. You have to do all this by X or you're in trouble. What we're starting to see now, and we've probably seen a change over the last 5 to 10 years, is pay as you go. And Mary, jump in if you have anything as I go here. But the pay as you go is more of a developer funded TIF. So the intent is here, hey, we have an agreement with you, and we'll start paying you once you're at a certain point. So once you're 50% of the way there, we'll start giving you some money. Once you're 75%, we'll give you a little bit more. And then when you're done, we'll give you 5 or 10 more years of funding, and we'll pay you back. So yes, we'll give you $1 million, but we're not really going to give you $1 million day one. That is a way to do things. We don't see that happen as often. Some places do when they have other very successful TIFs in the community. But most often we see the pay as you go, and I know you all have done this recently, so you're continuing to see development in your community and probably being asked all the time. Because that is the beauty once you create these things, is everyone comes asking. And that's why you have to have some policy and sort of treat everyone the same. But the developer may get, hey, we're going to give you $50,000 in year 1 and $80,000 in year 2, and now in years, once you're done in year 3 through 10, we're going to give you another $10,000 or $100,000 or whatever it is to make your $1 million for your $20 million investment. And so that's some of the things that we kind of see, and is probably the newest, I'd say, or most common practice now in developer is the pay-as-you-go or pay-go TIFs. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, and just that sometimes you'll get negative commentary from your,
and it lowers your risk.
Sometimes you'll get negative commentary from either other lawmakers or from constituents because they remember a TIF where it wasn't pay-as-you-go that happened some time ago. I know in one community that I used to cover when I was a practitioner had an upfront TIF grant paid out to a developer, and then everybody hated TIF in that community. Everybody remembered that one bad example. That's why most communities have gone to developer funded. And so that's another thing. If you don't understand the concept, that's where you need to pick up the phone and call the staff, and Liz's team can help you with the talking points. I don't mean talking points, but just the argument to overcome that objection, where she can give you hard data, which can tell the story, that can say things such as, we were at $2,500 a year in tax, and because of this, we're able to predict hundreds of thousands or $1 million or whatever it is. And that can be some of the most powerful way to express what the benefit of it is to your taxpayers.
And I mean, again, communication and make sure you're telling the right story, I think, is really important in these pieces, and making a connection to say, well, this area of the community is important for X. This site ties back to our goals and objectives and your plan, and you're putting all the pieces together. So I know we started maybe 5-10 minutes late, so hopefully we can go just kind of wrapping up here, and I'll kind of brush through. But you know, there's a public sector role, so you're either a facilitator or the initiator. It means someone's coming to you with a project, or you want something to happen based on your plan. And so it's really important. You can assemble land. You could build a business park, right, and not have a developer. Or someone could come to you and say, hey, I want to do something on X and tear this down or make improvements or just put a facade in my downtown building. Sometimes you have to help out, and there's different ways you can function as a public sector. Your private sector players are developers, investors, your banking community, many others who engage in the process, those who have to go to Plan Commission to get things approved. There's a whole process. Making that as easy as possible is important, and I'm going to zoom through these, Liz. So the intent is really to find ways, and your plan should help you make things easier, ways to facilitate the deal, ways to engage. That's your job, right, is make it easy on you to understand why it's happening, make it easier to ensure development happens in your community, and increasing your tax base. Making sure people have jobs or places to live. There's many different reasons why you do the projects that you do, making sure an area of town looks nicer than it did before. Do you have what it takes to initiate? That's really important. Do you have the right people at the table? Are you engaging your right staff? Are you as council informed? Do you understand the plan? Have you done your due diligence? Are you trusting your staff? Have you engaged your attorney? There's a million things we can do. Have you made sure that there's the lender who's done their due diligence? Are you finding partners to engage in the process? Have you looked at the deal? Now, this is a staff thing, less of a staff, but I want you to know, like, people actually really do this. Your staff does this. Many of us do this as we're working through. Here's a way you can look at some different projects. And then the developers agreement. And again, we're running out of time here, but developers agreements are so important. I can tell you there's not a developer who won't do a deal. We've actually found really good ways to do MOUs, memorandums of understandings. I think you all have done this in the past from projects I worked on 5 or 6 years ago that I remember. Pre-development agreements, just making sure everybody's coming to the table, understanding what they're going to get in the end, that you kind of can, right? I mean, I'm going to ask for the moon and stars, and hopefully I land somewhere in the middle of the galaxy, and you're not going to want to, like, there's a fine balance, right? So ask for more, hopefully you get this, and there's a good balance in negotiations and conversations, and that's why it's called negotiating, because you got to get to a common point. You know, if a developer wants $1 million, they may start out by asking for 5. Well, if I ask for $1 million and I know you're going to talk me down and I want $1 million, I'm not going to ask for $1 million up front. You know, it's like when my kids want cookies, they ask for 3 and I probably give them 1. Same concept is that, you know, there's a negotiation on both ends, both yours and theirs. Empower your staff. Stay out of it as much as you can. If I'm being honest from a council standpoint, empower your staff to do it. Have as little conversation here until you're sure it's kind of worked out. Yes, there's a public process you have to follow. Yes, there's closed session. You need to talk to your attorney. But there are some interesting things that you can do before things become public that they're not half-baked. I think that's really important. I say as a former recovering staff person to many and still serving many communities, make sure your ideas are out there half-baked. Because again, if it's not thoroughly thought through, you don't want gossip getting out there, and you want to understand that it needs to be fair for everybody. I mean, we need developers in our communities because we need to build our tax base. We need people investing in their homes and in their buildings, or we don't have the money. And so there is a very interesting concept, and there is some risk to it. You kind of have to take that, right? We all take a risk when we leave the house every day. There's many different things that we do. There's still some risk, and you have to weigh out what that means and how you do it. There's ways to make different people kind of on the hook. And so now that my clicker's working, I'm going the wrong direction. But I think, you know, think of those things. Look to your plan. Is it making an impact? Are you assessing the benefits, the risk versus the impact? You know, the do's and the don'ts. Do the smell test. How are you feeling? Does it tip the scale in your favor? Again, you know, that 6-5 vote or 51% versus 49 is still your majority. Also go with your gut. There's some funny terms that we use, like, is it a dog? Is it really going to make it? I'm a dog person, so I think, like, maybe it should be, is it a cat? But it's a term in the banking industry called, is it a dog? Like, is it not going to make it? Does it pass the smell test? But again, most importantly, if there's one thing, you know, does it benefit the greater good? There's to me, a big difference when you think about bigger picture, and I think about why I do what I used to do or what I still continue to do every day, is does it benefit the greater good? Do the pros outweigh the cons? And then can I go back to my plan, and does it align with my goals? I think the big thing to remember here is I can tell you stories of a million places where I've done this before. I've written TIF in many communities. I've done a million deals. I've had really good ones. I've had a few bad ones. I'm really good at what I do, so I haven't had as many bad ones. I'm kind of lucky in that sense. But I have my letters when I didn't like them. But there's going to be bad ones. 10% of projects fail. It's a statistic. Something's going to go wrong, and it's going to happen here once or twice. Doesn't mean that you failed. And so what I would say is, while we can give you examples, you can look at what other places have done. Every project is different. Every opportunity is different. Every risk is different. What a win looks like to you may be different to me, right? And maybe modifying or increasing your tax base, maybe you just want it to be stable. Maybe you just want dilapidated houses to be better. Maybe you just want to clean some dirty stuff off the riverfront, and maybe it's a park. That's not necessarily increasing your tax base. So just remember that, every project is an opportunity to take a risk and win. So as we kind of dive into that, there's empower your staff. We obviously sell our conferences. You all have been, 2 of you have been there. There's a lot of different places you can kind of get data and information, and don't hesitate to reach out and look for it. But the biggest thing I kind of like to joke with people, but this is one of our favorites, and we stole this research from one of our other colleagues, but they talk often about, what do you want in your community? Do you want a Bloomingdale's? Which, let's be honest, is all overpriced stuff that I can get at TJ Maxx eventually. Or do I want a Bloomingdale's? And not that there's anything wrong with used furniture here at Bloomingdale's that they may or may not have picked up off the street or bought from St. Vinny's and refurbished and tried to resell. But, are you being realistic? Do you really want either of these in your community? And that's kind of the trick question, right? If you had to pick, well, I don't want either. And so as we recognize kind of what our development means, what we want and what we need in our communities, maybe it's nothing that's being offered to us. And then be future thinking. As I said, we know workforce is changing. The things that we've seen, things that have happened, COVID, other things have changed our mindset on how we function. And so whether you like the word sustainable, right, it used to be a big buzzword, but there's different ways to do things that is sustainable, which just means that we're still around in the long term. Sustainable is not meant to be a buzzword. It's just meant to be am I still here? Are we still doing things, and are we functioning well? We stole this for Rotary. It's a real feel-good slide because I like to end on hugs, but kind of my thought about, as you think of, there's so many different things, kind of connects back into our puzzle pieces, but there's so many different things that you do in a community and making sure that you're kind of packaging them all well. Since we're running late, we're not going to do this, but I do have one question. Now that we've met, would you change your elevator pitch at all? Are there different, now that we've had some of this conversation, is there anything you might say or do differently? Go with Chad's. Chad wins.
Well, the more and more everything I mentioned, nothing was really unique in what I mentioned for northern Wisconsin. So, yeah, I guess I got to rethink that.
Your differentiator.
Yeah.
What is it? Yeah. Cool. Anyone else? And again, I want to thank you. I know we're kind of on time, and we went through a lot of information, but kind of questions, follow-up thoughts, anything we could hit on for you?
One question, we kind of talked about tax increment district.
Mike, Randy,
Jeez, I'm sorry. We've kind of talked about, and I've seen this happen in different communities, just researching different projects, but in terms of the public ask, how much money is coming from the municipalities in terms of different development agreements coming forward, what is your sense of seeing things from the private sector and working in a lot of communities, hearing a lot of things with building costs, just pandemic-related things, just kind of interested what you have to say on that?
Yeah, I think there's a mixed bag. So people who have been able to lock in, we usually hear the Memorial Day and Labor Day dates. There's some interesting, wood actually just dropped. It's still more expensive than it was, but it's not as bad as it was in the last 2 weeks. Labor Day is the next time. We usually see some changes, especially here where supply and demand changes going into winter time. We have 2 seasons in Wisconsin, winter and construction. And so as we see those changes happen, I think you'll see this summer, we have seen some bigger projects. Wood, obviously steel, have impacted, made $25 million projects, $30, $35, $40 million projects, depending on size and scale, regulation and policy, and then getting the workforce has probably been the hardest things, which no surprise to us and really doesn't necessarily impact, or having to pay people more, and getting someone to actually do the work. Project starts, job starts have taken a lot longer. And then the weather, again, continues. Last year we were seeing developments in pouring foundations and roads and doing street work that we were surprised we were doing in November and early December. And then we didn't have as much rain, so we were able to start things, but then the ground didn't thaw and wasn't as soft as we needed. And so it's been kind of an interesting couple of years coming out of COVID as well. I think overall, some of the big changes, like trends that we've seen nationally, are like housing. They're actually saying like bigger houses, you know, some of the stuff you would have seen in historic communities. And then the new developments that we're seeing for 1 or 2 acre lots and stuff like that was actually going to start decreasing. We're going to see a major trend that has slowed down and stopped. We've actually seen more bigger houses continuing to be built. Obviously, there's a shortage. In the next few years, we're still going to continue to see if the numbers are accurate, you know, in the nation, $60,000 to $100,000 shortage of housing units, for individual families. So we're going to continue to see that trend change and shift a little bit, because I think people were doing more apartments, and we were seeing the perception behind that changed in COVID a little bit. Not a ton, but enough to fluctuate that trend where we thought maybe things were going to change and level out. You know, the hard part about Wisconsin, or the funny part, is when you think of the 80s and the data and the recession and what has changed then into the 90s and 2000 and then 08 and 9, is that we're never hit as hard here. We're relatively conservative in the banking industry. We're really conservative as communities and municipalities on our policy. And so when you see all those things change, we never get hit by the housing bubble or fluctuations in most areas that we've seen. I do think some of the increases in prices, you know, and inflation is not permanent right now. They're not necessarily saying it's a permanent change that we should be looking at. In 6 months, maybe we'll all feel differently. But overall, I think it's, you know, a lot of trends are positive. I think we're seeing the investments in the biggest pieces, even when the private sector has recessions or issues. I mean, that's the best time for the public sector to make investments. And so, as I think we talked to you, there's never a bad time when you're in municipal government or local investments that you can make in your community. You know, well, no matter what the market's doing, you should still be investing in your community and what you're doing. Any other thoughts or questions? I guess what we kind of want to leave with is, what? Oh, sorry.
Quick question. I'm glad you talked about risk there, because I think that's often underemphasized. Sometimes it's overemphasized by opponents as well. But, you know, we need realistic pro forma analysis because your back of the napkin there was pretty good, potentially overly optimistic as well. I mean, that's the best case scenario, obviously, that we present. But we need to look at all of these. So I'm glad you did mention that. Do you have are you lobbying at all right now for anything that's big that we should know about? That, like, for example, maybe the cap right now, 20%.
So right now, our lobbyist is working with our legislative committee, and all members of WIDA are able to participate in that committee. And we will be setting the agenda for the next session based on local communities telling us what is important and what they need to see changed legislatively. So thank you for asking that question. I'll leave you all with a brochure and my business card so you have contact information, and I'll put you in touch with our lobbyist, Michael Welsh, if you have any strong opinions. A lot of times he sends out a call to members because he may need someone locally to come and testify for a particular bill. So if something that's your hot button item comes up on the agenda and it's going to be up for debate, it's, you know, everyone at the Capitol knows Michael's our lobbyist, so they know that he's going to be pro or con something, right? But when he can bring a member and the member can say, this is what's happened in my community and we don't ever want to see this happen again, so this is why this bill is important for us. That's exactly how we got the URTID bill improved. Is a member came to us and said, we have a project that we can do, but this is killing us because there's just so much cost involved in remediating a building. And so that actual individual member helped write some of the proposed bill by giving, you know, anecdotal and real life examples of what was holding them back.
And I'd say on the TIF side, Right now, that committee in general is sort of, I think, maybe go back, maybe you're making a little more pointed of a question. In Mary's point, we're dialing back since it's an election year to just see who kind of comes in. We do have a specific to TIF. We have a legislator who is adamantly opposed, who does not help us at all. When we can zip Mr. Strobel up, it helps. And so we're looking at what that means. I can tell you a couple of the active items. We are looking at specifically childcare and trying to find ways to invest in daycares, push funding. You can look at the policy side for the state, actually functions and monitors childcare versus should we be looking at investments made in businesses or in facilities itself, and the chicken or the egg? Do we need the facility? Do we need the kids? What's the balance? So we're looking at that. Broadband will continue to be important. And then again, TIF raising our 12%, 17%, what are some of the things we're looking at? What are the other pieces we want to talk about? And then affordable housing are kind of the top items right now. But it will also depend on which seats fall which way and which we think we can actually get through.
But you've had several things you've supported and passed, and then the governor vetoed, like the 10 million to
WC, yep.
Broadband. I don't know. I wasn't following it that closely why he vetoed it, but it seemed like it was a good thing.
Yeah, and we'll take them back and see, sometimes it's just negotiating points between you didn't give us this, we won't give you that. And so that's where we really fall. I'd say that's probably 99% of it is we fall then to Michael to say, well, what do we think we can actually get through? What are the things we still need to talk about over and over because they're important, but do we recognize, I think sometimes we try to be, I'd say more honest than maybe we should be about like, yeah, we're going to do this, but we know it's not going to go anywhere, but at least we all kind of know we're still waving the flag or telling the story. That's where I'd say to you, though, and kind of as our last slide here, because I think this is sort of it of where we're at, but don't forget to connect with your legislators. If there are things that are important, Mary kind of hit that, it really does weigh a lot. You'd be surprised. Like I said, they're there to cut the ribbon or smile and take the picture, but if you can say, hey, here's something that's really important to us, and this is why, and this is how we've done TIF and developed the affordable housing or market rate housing, or this is how the downtown is the way it is. And yes, the mall was important back in the day. When I think of stuff you guys have got going on now or things I was part of even 8, 9, 10 years ago when I was working up here, tell them your story. Tell them why it's important. I'm not saying you should push, but sometimes it doesn't hurt to have appropriations. Not that any of us love that, but there's things that they can do to help you. And moreover, if they know it's important to their constituents, they should be speaking on that behalf, and maybe they think of things differently. Some of them don't care and don't listen, but I'd say a majority, Mr. Strobel hates TIF. He's always going to. Even if we show him a million great examples in his district. But I think there's a lot of people who, when they can tell a story and tie it back to their constituents and their people, one, it helps them get votes in the end, right? If at some point we all are doing the politicking piece, but tell them your story so they know why it's important to you and what you're doing. Mary mentioned her website. I said we're updating our bulletin. We update it every July and August, so it'll be new and updated. These are some of the old grant programs, but a shameless plug for both WIDA and Veerbicker, but we really do believe and love what we do. If there's anything we can ever do to help all of you, your staff, questions, comments, concerns, please don't ever hesitate to reach out. That's what we're here for, so thank you so much.